And we are live. Yay. We're here on a Sunday again, as always. For those of you watching the replay, we're here every week. Sunday, hopefully my mic's good. Sundays at 11:30 a.m. California time. And we'll go for about 2 hours or so. Alrighty, waiting for people to roll in here, ask some questions. Feel free to say hi. Let me bring up some comments. Recent comments. Oh, yes, there's one that I wanted to address. Somebody asked on a video recently pronunciation of words starting with S following CH. So it's an interesting question. This here. So this person, right? If you have blah 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 CH, so the ch sound, right? It must be the ch sound. And then we have a word that starts with S, so S blah blah blah. How do we pronounce that? Is there an easier way to pronounce that? It's an interesting question. I played with it a little bit. I haven't thought about this specific detail too much before, but I played with it a little bit to see what we have. And there's two things here. So if we say, if it's possessive, right, that's going to cause a bit of a change. So let's talk about that first because that's the easy one. If I say, let's see here, the watches, or let's see here, the beaches, sand. Okay. So if we say something like this, you'll notice that I'm not saying like so I'm not doing CH to S. I'm saying the watches, the beaches. So it actually sounds like watch is or beach is. Now this is not a contraction with is. It's just that apostrophe S possession thing, which when we contract is, we also write apostrophe S. That can be confusing, but the pronunciation here actually is going to sound as if we are saying watch is uncontracted. Now it could be it could also be like a little tiny schwa, just so like watches, chiz, or beaches. Either way is fine. It could be or both of those would be very, very common. So that's the easy thing. You're actually putting a vowel between it, and they're not going to directly go together. Let me see if I say that quickly. Watch space. Yeah, even if I'm speaking quickly, there's going to be some sort of little gap, probably a tiny, tiny little sort of schwa sound, something there. So maybe there's variation there. I can't think of it. That's going to be my answer for that. However, what if we have something like the examples here? So we have which seems or touch stone, okay. Which that could actually be one word. You can touch stone, or something could be a touchstone. Either way, it wouldn't change the pronunciation. But what do we do here? Well, we are not going to put a sound between. Okay, that's not going to happen. If you're enunciating and you want to make it very clear, we'll put a space there, but we won't put a sound between it. So if I say like which seems, so you notice it's not like whiches, that's which seems, or touchstone. So that's sort of this enunciated, kind of easier version to do it, but of course we don't usually enunciate like that. That's just if you want to make it really clear, or you have a special reason to do that. So we know the CH sound. Teeth here, top of the mouth, there's a little bump. And we go up in the back. Okay. So this is the front part of the alveolar ridge, a little bump there. Now, the S in English is generally more or less going to be right under that bump. I've talked about lessons on how to form the CH or the CH and the S and all this stuff before, but it's generally going to be under that bump, and the air just kind of flows over it. Okay. If I were to sort of keep that position but close up, I would end up roughly in the T position. T. Now, we also know that CH is a combination between T and what we call the SH sound, so T and sh. When you blend them together, you start there and then you push out the SH from there, and you blend those two sounds together, you get sh, 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 sh. So this is going to be an important point later because I'm going to make a lesson on this about the TSH illusion. I made a lesson about the TS illusion. You're not necessarily just going here and pushing an SH through that. You're actually blending a T sound and an SH sound into a new sound, ch. Now, because the S is here, the T is here, and then the ch it starts from that position where the T is, which is above the S, we're kind of in the same area, right? But the SH, which would be the end of the CH, also the end of SH, SH is back here, but it's behind the S. So the CH, if we do ch, 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 sh, 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 okay, we actually end up behind the S. So if the S is here, right under the bump, and the CH, the end of CH where the SH sound is here, what do? Well, we need to go into the S, right? So, so the first thing that I would recommend is, can you produce this CH sound, ch? Can you produce the S sound, s? Can you transition in a nice, clear, slow way between the CH or the SH, because the end of CH is the SH. Can you transition from that SH position into the S with one breath, right? So like I just did, right? You can start it with CH if you want, but if you can't do that, that's the first problem. You got to make sure you can do that. One important note here, right? So I'm explaining, right? Okay, the T is here, the SH is back here, the S is here. And there might be the way that, say, if your language has an S sound, many languages seem to, or if you have a CH sound or whatever it is, there might be the way that you place or produce that sound, certain little details with the formation of the sound that are different in American English. Usually that's not too big of a deal with these types of consonant sounds, but it can be. And this ties into mouth posture, which again, I'll be making more lessons on in the future, talking about how all this fits into the posture. But we're just talking about the basic articulation of the sound right now. So I would also probably pay very close attention because maybe you're doing S, but for example, if you have a mouth posture, say if you speak Spanish or maybe French or Russian or something, where any of these languages that tend to have the jaw held a little bit more closed, there's not as much space in the mouth, the tongue tends to be pushed forward a little bit compared to American English. That's going to put your basic tongue position somewhere around here, where American English basic tongue position is somewhere around here. Okay, it's more open, we're centered. It's very open mouth language, open mouth pronunciation. British English is also quite closed, so it's not just English itself. But if that's the case, you probably have an S sound, but because you have this different posture and you have less space in your mouth, you might be producing S more up around this area instead of back here, like under the bump. It might be in front of the bump, closer to the teeth, like and that generally sounds mostly the same. It sounds like an S sound. We hear that little whistle, okay? And at the end of the day, that's not the biggest deal. But obviously, if you have this forward posture and you're trying to pronounce American English, you don't have enough space for the sounds. Your tongue is going to be slightly out of place to be able to effortlessly produce the sounds, and it's going to cause you extra problems. So keep that in mind for mouth posture. Again, I'm going to be talking more about that in the future with mouth posture lessons as I nail down that approach and process. But try to pay attention to the way that you form, in this case, the CH sound, the way that you form the S sound. Like, where is it placed in your mouth? Is it farther forward? Is it farther back? Maybe it's back here. I don't know. And then use what I described as the guideline to adjust. And it could be that the difficulty that you have producing CH and then S isn't in the sounds themselves, but it's the way that you're holding your vocal tract and or the exact placement that you're making for those sounds, that it's actually different in American English than what you're used to. This is another reason why I think the IPA is kind of limited, because let's say like the S sound, if there's nothing special about it, it sounds basically the same. They're not going to make any distinction. It's just going to be the same S symbol. And that may be fine in terms of the sound itself. But then when we get into going from that sound into another sound, or blending sounds, linking to certain sounds, it does start to actually cause real problems. And you have no idea, because you look at the IPA and you're like, well, the IPA says this sound and this sound in English, between my language and English, are the same symbol, same sound. So the way that I'm producing it should be the same. But that may not be the case. So you have to look at those types of details. Anyway, Meadow is here. Welcome, Meadow. I'm doing good. Hope you're doing well as well. I still have to finish up this explanation here. Nobody's asked any other questions, so I'm taking my time, going very thoroughly. The last thing that I haven't mentioned here is how actually do you go from the CH to the S. So now that we all know all the pieces, we know that you might need to make some adjustments in the way that you're articulating the sounds, or you're placing the sounds. If I say which and seems, which seems, which seems, which seems, that is a little bit enunciated. That will also work in a bit faster speech. I'm going to play with the really fast version in a second, but that's not, if you separate them like we talked about earlier, that's going to be like, if you want to make it really clear, really enunciated, you can actually put a space between them. But I'm not actually putting a space here. What I'm doing is I'm going, okay, going to the T position, the start of CH. I'm making my CH sound, which, okay. And then, like I mentioned earlier, can you transition from ch to s? And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm saying which, again, the CH is here, or about back here is where the SH is. It's the end of the CH. And then I'm just pushing it forward into S. That's all I'm doing. Now, there is a little bit of a difference with sort of like how the sides of the tongue might anchor itself between the CH and the S, because S is a bit of a tighter sound. It needs more of a control of that airflow, I guess, over the tongue. So that's probably going to be the hardest point, is kind of figuring out how to get your tongue to fully transition from ch to s. I'm going to try to include little details like sides of the tongue and stuff in the mouth posture. For some sounds in the main lessons that I made before, I did include details like that because I was aware of them. They're very important to the formation of the sound, but there's other subtle little details here and there that I either wasn't aware of, or at the time didn't think were as important. And so mostly things that I just wasn't aware of, because I'm focused on where the sound is articulated, not like what are the sides doing. But sometimes that's important information that could mean the difference between you producing the sound or producing the sound more easily. But again, focus on that transition. Can you do ch? Can you do s? Okay. How do you go between them? Just focus on getting between them. So which seems, touchstone, touchstone. That's all I'm doing. all I'm doing, just flowing from one sound to the other. Um, Now, is there another way to do that that might be a little bit easier? Let's see. Which seems, yes, there is. This is definitely going to be used in very fast speech. It can be used in more normal speed speech. Um, Maybe not on the slower end of normal speed, but if you're speaking quickly enough, doesn't have to be super fast, but if you're speaking, you know, pretty normally, pretty quickly, what you can do, what you can do is you can change the CH to an SH. And the reason why this works, number one, again, we need a certain amount of speed because especially at fast speed, I've mentioned many times before, at really fast speed speech, like faster than normal speed, where I'm just talking really, really quickly like this, okay? Which you don't need to do, by the way, but that tends to break things. That's one reason I haven't talked about it too much, because it gets complicated. There's a lot of things I'm not consciously aware of. You guys don't have to speak that fast to be normal, natural, native sounding speakers if you want to be. That's its own little world. But even within the normal range of speed, if you're on a bit of that faster end, the benefit of speed is that it can kind of hide some little details sometimes. In this case, as I said, CH starts in T, but it ends in SH. So if you're speaking quickly enough, if I say which seems, wish seems, what I'm really saying is this. Now, if I were to say those two words, I'd probably say like the wish seems impossible, right? The wish seems impossible. The wish seems impossible. The wish seems impossible. And if I say which seems impossible, 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 they're going to sound either the same, they can potentially sound the same, or they're going to sound almost exactly the same. And I say almost exactly the same because it's possible that instead of going fully into the T and then an SH, when we go from the I into the ch, we'll still drop the T, but we might be a little bit out of that SH. Like we're sort of as if instead of going from t to sh, it's like we're already partially through that transition without actually starting in T. And so if you listen very, very close, there might be a small difference. It doesn't really matter that much. But again, that's why you have to be speaking fast enough, because otherwise it might sound like a completely different word. But context is also important, we know. But if you say, right, blah, 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 which seems interesting, obviously you're not saying wish, even though the pronunciation can be the same. So the short answer, again, if you're speaking quickly enough, if you're not speaking quickly enough, you want to go from the full CH sound to sh, s, ch, ch, ch. But if you are speaking quickly enough, you can drop the ch part, start of it, go straight into sh, and then transition from sh into s. Makes it a little bit easier because you don't have to start in that T and blend it into the SH. If I do touchstone, that's the touchstone. And even to my ears, I'm aware I'm constantly trying to produce SH plus T. If I do it really slowly, my brain is like, yeah, that's an SH, not a CH. But if I just say it quickly, even though I'm fully aware that I'm just doing a straight SH sound, touchstone, my brain is like, no, there's a CH there. Even though I know there's no CH there, my ears are telling me that there's a CH. So that's how that works. Okay. So hopefully that will answer your question, make it a bit easier. I know it's not an easy answer, but the reality of speech is that there are ranges. Every sound has a range of articulation. It's not a pinpoint thing like, the IPA might make you think, or other teachers might make you think, because they tend to talk about these fully formed, fully articulated versions of the sounds. And that's one reason why you still struggle with both maybe listening and or your own speaking if you want to sound like a native, because you're not taught the little details of how natives move from sound to sound, how they don't fully articulate sounds all the time. And that's part of what I'm trying to do here. So, like and subscribe. Or even better, become a channel member. Got to make a plug there. But moving on. So Meadows question. Sorry, Meadow. I was trying to finish that up before I move on. But thank you for joining us today. Which one is correct? The teacher asked him about his name or asked for his name? Okay, so these both work. They're both perfectly fine sentences. There can be a difference. These can mean the same thing. So if you ask for someone's name, you're asking like what's your name, right? Give me your name. If the teacher asked him about his name, that could mean the same thing. But that also has another meaning, which is more likely, I think, which is that, right, it's about. Think about it as about. So there can be some overlap between for and about. We can't get the same meaning, but they're different prepositions. About, very similar to around. They're actually very tightly linked and historically and in the subconscious, how it feels in the logic and everything. About is a scope. Around is like around a central point. Right? And then a scope, you can sort of take that idea of around, make it into a scope that you focus on something, focus on a point. So they're actually directly tied together. It's just two ways of looking at the same thing. But they're around and about tend to be used quite differently in many cases. So if I'm talking about pronunciation, that's the topic, that's the focus, right? And the notice on a topic, right? So that focus can then become a platform that we're standing on. These are all linked under the surface in the subconscious mind. But we take that scope, that focus, and in this sentence, this context, what this would probably more likely mean is, right, that his name, let's say his name is, what's something that's not so everyday ordinary. I don't know, let's say, let's change it to her, just because this is an example off the top of my head that I would be able to use. Let's change it to her. Let's say her name is Luz, we might say in English, or Luz in Spanish, which literally translated to English means light, but it is a name in Spanish. It's a fairly common name. I think it's common, seems common to me. And so we say, okay, the scope, the focus is in this case, her name, which is Luz. So we put that in the scope, and the teacher is asking her about the name, not what the name is. In that case, we know what the name is, right? Now the scope is on the name, and the teacher wants to know more information about, notice, more information about the name. We're targeting the name. So the teacher, in this case, it could be like, oh, so Luz, that's an interesting name. Does that mean something? Okay, now we're talking about the name. So in that case, you would definitely say the teacher asked her about her name. If the context is clear that the teacher doesn't know the person's name, then about would be the same as for in this sentence, and they become interchangeable. For would definitely be more common because about, again, would have that different meaning depending on the context. For would definitely be much more common. It would be the normal thing to say. But potentially about could mean the same thing. Hopefully that's clear. I'll see Delio's here. Welcome, Delio. Don't want to ignore you. If what the teacher, what? Okay, so that doesn't work. You can't put what and that together. There's probably cases where you can do that, but that doesn't work here. So if, oh, I see, what if, probably, you just mixed up the words. But then that and the don't go together. Either way, okay, I'm going to read this as what if the teacher asked him, what is your name? Okay, so now, okay, so you're giving the context. So here the teacher doesn't know the name. So the teacher says, what is your name? And then later, you're explaining to your friend the events that happened, and you say, oh, and then, he walked into the classroom, and then the teacher asked for his name, right? Or he walked into the classroom, and the teacher asked him about his name. That could also potentially work, but again, for would be much more common. That would be the thing that we'd probably say. Good. Okay, Delio, welcome. Delio. Abdullah is also here. Welcome. Okay, so speaking of, can you talk a little bit about what can happen in the transition from the TH to the S in with some? Yeah, okay, so probably the single most common and easy thing to do is just drop the TH. So I know you're talking about the transition here, but as long as you're not speaking too clearly or too slowly, you can just drop the TH. So you can say, I won't do the full transcription, but not equals, dash. Sometimes I do that. I try to put dash and it hits equal. So like with some. Perfectly fine, especially the word with. With is sort of exceptionally susceptible to dropping the TH sound, even if like there's not a sound after that we could drop it for. And that's because it's a very common preposition. But regardless of whether it's with or not, if we're going from TH to S, voiceless TH, God, ranges get complicated. So if I fully enunciate the TH, and I fully enunciate the S, okay. That's all it is. There's nothing special. There's no linking. It's when we're talking in many cases, when we're talking about like the fully articulated, fully enunciated form of pronunciation, which again isn't what you have to do, but if you're enunciating, if you have a special reason to do that, you want to make it extra clear, whatever it is. When we're talking about that type of thing, just going from a pure sound into a pure sound, without any special linking, anything happening, what happens is you just have to have really good tongue control. That's it. Like, make sure you can do the first sound. Make sure you can do the second sound. If you can do that, you have a start point and you have an end point. You start in the start point, and then you make sure that you move into the end point. Now, you might have trouble doing that. One, it could just be a lack of experience getting your tongue muscle to perform in that way, in which case it's just simple practice. You just get used to it. It's not that big of a deal. You just got to do that. There could be certain other factors, like maybe it could have something to do with mouth posture. It could have to do with, maybe your S, like I was talking about earlier, maybe your S generally sounds really good. Maybe it even sounds perfect or near perfect. But not all S's are produced exactly the same. If I do S or S, right? One was here, one was here. Now, if you listen very closely in comparison, you can say, okay, I can notice maybe there's a little bit of difference here and there, but the nature of the S sound, same thing with the E's. The E's sound very, very similar between languages, almost the same. The nature of these sounds is that even if you have a different posture, they're going to sound almost exactly the same. But then that's fine for the sound. But then if you're going from one sound into another sound, right? So if you try to do TH here and your S is up here and you do a that's going to be a different transition, which may be a little harder than the actual transition that a native speaker would use, because we place the S farther back here. So there's other little details like that that you need to pay attention to. But that's, again, why I say make sure you get the sounds first, right? And that you're actually doing the sounds. Going back to mouth posture again, it could be that your the central tension, wherever the tension is for that accent, in this case, American English, we know is a little lower. It's in the middle, slightly pushed back. Okay. That center of gravity, which here's a little note. I've further refined a bit of my terminology here. because when people were trying to get that sound and I was talking about the central tension, they were adding too much tension to the tongue. And I realized I need to slightly change the way I'm labeling things. When we're doing the not as like a little reduction true schwa, not cut, something like that, like in cut, the upside down B. That's just the two endpoints of the range for one sound that we call the schwa. That I call the schwa anyway. But sort of that middle, very open, very clear center of gravity schwa sound. Okay. If you can get your tongue to do that sound, then you've found where that central tension will be, and it should sound very open, very clear, and still very schwa-like. That'll sound great. Then if I'm doing an E, if I'm doing a T, if I'm doing a S, if I'm doing a Th, if I'm doing whatever sound, doesn't matter, any sound, diphthongs, every single sound and every transition between every single sound will have a little bit of tension. Very subtle, very light. I only notice it if I pay very close attention to it. But it's in there, right in the middle of the tongue where that would be if you just sort of opened up and relaxed into that and pronounced it. It's where it's held. But if I go into E, it's still there. If I go into T, it's still there. If I go into Th, it's still there. And it can move around a little bit. It can get a little shallower here and there. But it's there. And if you don't have that posture, that could be the little missing link, not just for certain sounds, because again, maybe your sounds sound good. We don't really notice any problems. But then if you're trying to transition from, say, th to s, it could be that part of the reason why that's difficult is because you don't have the core posture and you don't have that central stability point. You're probably using your native posture, which has a different stability point, maybe up here, maybe back here, who knows, wherever it is. And so trying to get your tongue to go to s using that other stability point is either making it very difficult or it's making it to where you're not producing the correct sound or the correct effect. Now we're kind of in the weeds here, but some of these details can be very, very important. And that's those are things that I'm trying to explore and uncover and figure out how to simply teach through mouth posture. Anyway, hopefully that answers your question, Delio. But to sum that up really quick, mouth posture could be a big factor. Aside from mouth posture, you just got to practice getting your tongue to go from one sound to the other sound if you have both those sounds to begin with. That's all it really is. And then, of course, we have special linking things where maybe, like in this case, we can drop the TH, and that makes it easy in that case. So, yeah. Okay, what about making a dental T? What about making a dental T? I don't know what the question is. Are you talking about in terms of mouth posture or just like how to make a dental T? Because I have a lesson on that. There's a range of placement for that. Maybe you're asking about the range. I don't know. I'll let you clarify that. But are you planning to improve the ear training application? Yes, I've been planning for a while. My original idea was, okay, I'm going to make the Windows version. And I got that. Basic version 1 done. With some. Oh, okay, I'll go back to that. Version 1 done, put it out there. Okay, you guys have the basic ear training software. Then I was going to make the Mac version and the iOS version, but in order to make anything for Apple products, you have to have a Mac. You have to use Apple products, which is one of the dumbest, stupidest things. That's why I do, at this point in my life, I hate to admit it, I do think, because I always hate Windows. Windows is Microsoft is a terrible company. Windows has always been an inferior operating system with all kinds of problems. I prefer Linux, honestly. For the longest time, I would always say Windows is better than Mac, just because like I prefer it, even though I don't think Windows is all that great. At this point, I'm going to say, I know this is a tangent, but at this point, I feel pretty strongly that like, no, Mac is very, very superior to Windows. Apple products are very superior to Microsoft products, however much it pains me to say. But that being the case, I will never buy an Apple product. I will never buy an Apple product. I've never had an iPhone. I will never have an iPhone unless this thing I'm about to mention changes, which I doubt it ever will. I've never owned a Mac. The only time I've ever used a Mac was in school, because here in the States, Macs get donated to schools as, whatever. And so it was always very uncomfortable and unfamiliar. That's part of the reason why I didn't like it. But I really, 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 really hate, the reason why I will never buy an Apple product is because when it comes to technology, obviously there should be ways to, build something, put your work into something, just like, if you build a house, you can, sell the house to somebody, whatever. If you build software or you build hardware, either way, you should be able, especially the hardware, but those are two different things. You should be able to sell it, right? To have a business around it, this and that, whatever. But especially in terms of software, I believe very strongly in open software. And that's a whole other topic that I'm not going to dive down the whole rabbit hole of. But Mac is insanely proprietary. And I heard it's no longer the case, but I'm pretty sure in the past, like you could only use like an Apple mouse and an Apple keyboard and all this stuff. I think now you can plug in like any USB Mac or mouse or keyboard. But they're just so insanely proprietary that philosophically it goes against just my own stance, my own beliefs and stuff. I do like that they're very good with security. They just seem to definitely do a better job with that than Windows, and especially than Google. Sorry, overlords, Google, as I'm using your YouTube platform. But anyway, all of that tangent was because you asked about the ear training application. My original plan was I was going to come out with a Mac and an iOS version. And then I was going to, over time, as I had sort of maybe some time here and there, work on implementing new features and this and that. Obviously, I'm not a software developer. I did develop the ear training application by myself, 100%, the first version. I do want to learn more about how to program and be able to make my own little applications and stuff. But especially given Tkinter. Oh, on that point, okay, I don't have an Apple product. I was going to buy a Mac just to build the software. It's because Tkinter, I think it was Tkinter that I used. But anyway, I was going to do that. But then due to financial issues and this and that, I was never quite able. And I know I can get them super, super cheap, but I don't want to buy like a little box. I want to buy, like, if I'm going to buy something, I don't want to buy like a dusty old, crappy Mac that'll like live for like 6 months and then die. I wanted to buy, if I'm going to buy it, I might as well buy a solid product that I can then use for programming or whatever. And that kind of just like got pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. And at one point I had to get this computer that I'm using now, which is my main computer, because editing videos was taking even longer than it does now because my old computer was so slow. So I kind of never really got around, for financial and time reasons, I never got around to coming out with a Mac version. I never got around to coming out with version 2 of the application. My current plan is basically build up the English Hacks business, the channel, I'm going to rebrand eventually at some point, I'm going to rebrand my books under the English Hacks logo and all that stuff. Actually make it into an LLC, like an official business operation and all that stuff. And once it gets to a certain point, even though I am going to have my own programming projects and stuff in the future for myself, and I might make some other things for the ear trainer software, what I'm probably going to end up doing is just hiring a programmer. I'm going to say, this is what I wanted to do. This is the features it should have fun. It's not going to be very complicated. It's just, I don't have the time right now because I'm trying to put so much into just building up, particularly the YouTube channel, but English Hacks in general, in addition to the other jobs that I do, teaching, my second job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are plans, but I have no idea when that's going to happen. But it will include, right now it's basically a big minimal pair trainer, but it will include things about like rhythm and stress and all different things as well. So, okay, so dental T in the phrase with some, possible. Definitely possible. You, as I said, you can pretty much always replace a voiceless th with a dental T. It's just not always the most convenient thing. It doesn't always come out that way. It's very common, but a regular th might come out too. That's perfectly fine. If you're going into like in other, that in that case it's a voice th, doesn't matter. Become a dental D. But going from th to because we kind of have to pull all the way back, we're most likely just to do a really lazy th that's partially formed. So instead of going all the way up here or up here to make it that dental version, we're actually more likely to go the opposite way. And instead of saying other, we'll do like other. It almost like it's almost not even formed at all. Allows us to speak faster. Other. So, but yeah, the dental is possible there. It's a possible thing. And if you're doing the transition that, right, with now that creates another TS illusion type thing. But you do go into the T. Of course, it could be in the normal T position, but it needs to be flatter. If it's not flat enough, it's going to be a regular T. In that case, you're kind of pushing the S through that as it opens, just like you would for the TS illusion. Anyway, Juan Garcia is here. Welcome, Juan. I have a question. How to pronounce flap T, for example, in words like matter, pattern, better? Thank you. I have a lesson talking about formation of T. I have another lesson talking about formation of D. One thing that I will clarify here before I direct you where to look for that. So there is no such thing as a flap T, at least in American English. It does not exist. It does not exist. There is a flap D, and when something that is spelled with a T turns into a flap, the sound that is produced is the exact same sound as if it were spelled with a D. Remember, symbols are not sounds. I don't care if they're IPA symbols. I don't care if they're English letters. Symbols are not sounds. You want to focus on the sounds. Now, you might think that's not important. Well, okay, it's spelled with a T, so I'm calling it a flap T. It is important. It does have an effect. It causes confusion. If it doesn't cause confusion for you, great. Call it a flap T. I don't care. But flap T does not exist in American English. There is no sound where we do this and a T is produced. It's always a D. Okay? Matter, pattern, better. Right? We don't say like, I don't even know if it's physically possible. We don't say like matter, pattern, better. That sounds like it would maybe be more of a T. And it's very difficult to do. So the way you do it, you flap it. If you speak, since your name is Juan Garcia, I assume you speak Spanish. The short, simple answer in your case would be basically do a single tap R, like in pero. I'm really over enunciating that posture. I'm trying to adjust my Spanish posture, so sometimes I'm overdoing it. Say pay, pero, in pero, or not perro, right? Just a single one. It's not 100% the same. Your mouth posture in Spanish is a bit off, but a key way to make flapping the D in English a lot easier is to get the right mouth posture. Because Spanish posture, your mouth tends to be more closed, your tongue tends to be pushed forward a little bit. I don't know if that's generally applicable to all Spanish speakers. I don't know, some of the details are a little bit off, but that does seem to be my experience so far, and with most other languages. Point is that regardless of whatever your specific details of mouth posture are, in Spanish, American English is going to be more open. We're going to be more centralized into and from there we reach up and flap. So if you're speaking Spanish, your mouth is more closed, you have less space, okay? And when you do a single tap R, especially if your tongue is already pushed forward, you do a single tap R, number one, you're probably not going to hit the same place that we do on the top of the mouth. It's going to be up around here behind the teeth anyway, but it might be a little different. And you're not going to have that central pressure that American English has for the mouth posture. And you're not going to have as much space. So when you say like, See, I have that mouth posture for English. Pero. It's really hard for me to flap it without bringing that American posture in because I haven't trained that specific thing yet. But point is that it's going to sound really, really good. It's going to sound about the same, but it might be a little awkward in English as you go from like say into that flap because you have to go at and you're not used to that, or whatever the combination may be. So I would maybe focus first on mouth posture before you go to the sounds. If you don't want to do all that, if your goal is not to sound as close to a native as possible, you don't have to care about mouth posture. If it is, I highly recommend that you check out mouth posture. I have a couple basic lessons on that. If you type in English hacks mouth posture, I have a little playlist. There's only like 3 videos in there right now. You want to start with phase 0. Everybody should start with phase 0, regardless of if you're doing mouth posture or not. After that, I have phase 1, which will help you build that center of gravity that gives you more space in the mouth. And it helps you break that Spanish posture so that you can actually get into a lot of the sounds more easily. That aside, the flap T specifically, I guess I'll give you a direct link for this. Content. D sound. Okay, so the 4 Ds of American English. Get shareable link. Okay, now I'm sending you to the D lesson, not the T lesson, because again, it's a flapped D. I do also have a T lesson, which might also pop up. You can just type in like English hacks T sound, and you'll probably find the T lesson. But I talk about the formation of it in that lesson. This was before mouth posture, before I knew about it, so there's no mention of mouth posture in there. It's just my normal old way of explaining it. Josh Adams is here. Welcome. Greetings from another English-speaking Josh. Yes. Welcome, welcome. I'm an iOS developer. I agreed that Apple tends toward propriety. Yeah. It sucks. But that's its own thing. Whatever. Yeah, thanks for stopping by, though. Always interesting when natives interact with my content, because you're obviously not my target audience. But who knows what the algorithm does in suggesting things to people. But yeah, I don't have much to say on that. Abdullah, oh, I already did that one. Okay, Delio, thanks for your answer on with some. I asked that question just because I wanted to know more details, nerd stuff, because I usually drop the TH, which seems too easy. Well, it is easy. You're dropping the sound. You don't have to do the sound anymore. You're just going to s. If you can do those, that's a lot easier than doing th to s, like just objectively. So I sometimes feel like pronouncing it with a lazy th, which seems to require more tongue flexibility. With some. Yeah, there's a little bit of movement in there. I would actually say that it takes a lot less tongue control. But then again, how it feels in my mouth because of my posture and because I'm a native might be a little bit different than how it feels in your mouth, and you might not be doing it exactly the same way I'm doing it. So, but yeah, all you really do is, right, instead of fully extending it into that th, you just partially extend, right? That's one reason I think that we can drop th before s, is because with some, because there is that lazier form of the th. Like if you go from to s, or in this case I to s, is. Okay, if we go from sort of a really lazy th, which would be not into it'd be a bit lower, probably, but you don't go all the way into th, and you just sort of like just enough there to where it would be the lazy version, like with almost like an H kind of. That is almost directly below the S. And so it's just one more step to say, okay, well, let's not even extend to there. Let's just go straight into the S, right? With some. And it's gonna sound so similar to that if the lazy th were there, that we might as well just drop it. That's probably why that linking connection happens, or part of the reason, I would assume. But yeah, just don't extend all the way into it. If you can do the lazy th, you just go maybe open a little bit into the pull back a little bit with the front of the tongue with, and then go up into s. Listen. No big deal. I know it is off topic. We don't need the there. That does work, but usually we just say off topic. It's like a chunk. I know it is off topic, but since you mentioned your second job, can you tell us how much time do you work? So how much time, no do, right? If it were a direct question, you just say, how much time do you work? This is a very common English mistake. How much time do you work? Question mark. Okay, that's fine. Now you could add more to that, that's fine. But here, that how question is in a sentence. Okay, because of that, you can't use the question structure. I know it's stupid. People will still understand you if you're just like, whatever, I don't care. Then do what you want to do. But it's not correct. It will sound unnatural. So can you tell us, that's the start of the statement, sentence. Can you tell us how much time you work? Blah, 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 blah. So basically you just don't add that question. It would be the question structure. In the case of do, we tend to drop do if it's not a question. It's still there. It's just we don't say it. But if it's can, right, like can you work? You can work. You would switch the order. Can you? So like, tell us how much time you can work instead of telling us how much time can you work. Now that also does work, but in a different context. It's complicated. That's not the point. Let's move on. I also have a feeling that some things are kind of changing here a little bit. That'll go maybe into the changing grammar series that I'll make in the future. But to answer your question, I get caught up inside this sidetrack. That's not a coherent statement. I get caught up inside things. So can you tell us how much time you work overall and how do you manage your time about it? I work 2 jobs too. Okay. Well, there's pros and cons here, some positives and negatives compared to, most people, because everything I do is technically working for myself, where somebody who has, 2 jobs where they're actually working for somebody, like that would suck. I don't even want to have one job where I work for somebody else. It's extremely, extremely difficult for me to work for someone else, like whether that's, fast food, retail, something like having a boss and this and that, whatever it's just, it doesn't work well with me. Now, because of that, I have to manage my own time, which is its own problem. So there are trade-offs. If you just have to show up to work and clock in, obviously you just go there, you be there, you do your thing, you clock out, you leave, you're told what to do. It's easier in that sense, but I would gladly take the trade-off any day. So what I do, it's really tough sometimes. So I teach English. I still give classes. That's one job. I will have anywhere from things that fluctuate. Sometimes I have more classes, sometimes I have fewer classes. It varies. I notice over time it tends to kind of do this. I've been doing it long enough. About 3 years into teaching, I noticed that trend that sometimes it'll be kind of slow and then it'll be faster and then it'll be slow and then it'll be faster. So that is just nature, I think. But as long as it's not a super slow period, I will usually have at least 1 class a day. If I'm busy, I'll have 4 classes a day, which is my full slot. I only teach up to 4 hours a day, and that is for cognitive limitation limits and stuff. I need space between my classes. I can't just do like one class to another class back to back. I get very overwhelmed and drained very quickly. My productivity just plummets after that, and it kind of ruins my whole day. So I have up to 4 classes a day. That's 4 hours. And that in itself is what it is. Sometimes I have to also do preparation work, like for the lesson or send out homework or this or that. A lot of the work I'm doing now is it's almost all just mouth posture stuff, which I give guidance and recommendations, and then the student has to just go and figure out how to do it. So there's not a whole lot of things that I have to do for that. It's mostly the student outside of class. I do most of the work inside the class, which is nice for me. So that's that. That'll take up to 4 hours a day. I try to sleep. We'll start tallying up the hours here. I try to sleep 8 to 9 hours a day, which seems like a lot. Some people are like, "Oh, I can sleep 6 hours a day." Different people's brains are different. Obviously, there's a lot of factors here. There's, if you actually use your body more, you tend to sleep better and might need less sleep, as long as you don't, kill your body. And I'm not particularly physically active because of my work and because I have never been, except when I was doing judo, because I'm a nerd and I don't tend to exercise much. Something that I need to change. But all that being said, for whatever reason, I've noticed that I tend to naturally wake up about 9 hours after I go to sleep. Like if I don't set an alarm, usually most days, if nothing has broken too much with my pattern, it's just normal day, I could go to bed at 12 a.m. and within about 10 minutes, I'll wake up around 9 a.m. It's very, very consistent, very nice, but that does seem to be, for whatever reason, my natural amount of sleep that I tend to need. So that's 9 hours. I wish it could be less. I wish I could sleep 6 hours and get away with it. But I know it's not healthy. Sleep is very important. So I try not to. Sometimes I only get 7 hours of sleep for various reasons, but I try not to push that too much because it is very, very important. So we'll say 8, because I probably get closer to 8 on average. We'll say 8 hours for sleep. Okay, so that's up to 12 hours right there. So that's already half the day gone. My second job currently, unfortunately, is food delivery, which pays decently well. I get to set my own hours and stuff. I'm working through certain platforms, but they don't tell me what to do or how to do it. I get to accept whatever I want to accept, and I go and do the job. That I am currently doing for about probably an average of 5 hours a day, every single day, 5 hours in the car. It is starting to affect my body, unfortunately, which is not fun. But because of that, that's, again, we're trying to average here. It's probably actually closer to 6 hours a day because I tried to do the whole 6 hour period that I set for myself. But sometimes it's just super, super, super slow. And I'm like, I could go make a video or something, make better use of my time. So we'll say average 5 hours doing that. So now we're at 17 hours of the day. Then there's the rest of the time, right? So there's my teaching, which is one job. There's the food delivery, which is the other job. There's my sleep, which I'm dead. No productivity there. So that takes away a big chunk of the day. Then, of course, there's other little things like, which I actually don't eat that much. I need to eat more. That's a problem I've always had. So cooking doesn't usually take too much time because I just don't eat. But I need to change that. But obviously there is time where I eat, whether it's, I get food or I get snacks or I actually make something. During that time, I try to not do other things and just like watch some anime or something where I can kind of just relax. This obviously, like, I have to take showers and stuff, that takes some time. So we'll say miscellaneous daily living things, maybe like, I don't know, an hour and a half a day. Something in there, we'll just say an hour. I don't know what that is. So we're at about 18 hours. I think it was 18. I can't do math. Hold on. Yeah, 18 hours on average. The rest of the time I have for videos. or for other things I need to take care of. Now, unfortunately, I do have other things like on Thursdays and Sundays, especially Sundays. I tend to go visit my grandparents. That'll take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half. That is just on certain days, but that does take time away. Sometimes I have to take my mom to do things because she is having some issues driving right now. Sometimes she has to take me. I have to take her quite frequently, almost on like a day-to-day thing. It's not always like that, but that could take anywhere from 1 to 2 hours away from time that I would have spent editing videos. So there's all kinds of little factors that come in and get in the way. But I spend a lot of the rest of the time trying to like work on content for you guys. Now there are days like yesterday where my brain was just like, nope, we're not doing it. Because I've been pushing so hard trying to like come out with like, daily content, and you guys probably notice more frequency. And then the last few days, it's like there's nothing. And that's because yesterday my brain was just like, no, we're not doing it. I had a class in the morning. I did do my deliveries in the evening, but for pretty much the entire day, I just watched anime. Like, I just couldn't get myself to make content. So it's hard sometimes. The hardest part, and then of course I'm also supposed to be running an eBay store and I was trying to take an hour a day to post for stuff for that, but I haven't been doing that for like 2 months. So that's not even like currently on like taking time for me, even though it should be. But I would say if you include the time that I usually try to spend like editing or filming, making content or something like that, it's hard to average that, but that more or less usually takes like the rest of my time. So if we're at 18 hours, let's see, that would be what? 6 hours a day? That seems like a lot. It's probably not quite that much. But yeah, I spent a lot of time in the editor. I know that much. A lot of time in the editor. So anyway, basically, the one thing I can say is usually from the time I wake up until the time I go to bed, it may not be an active job that I'm making money from, like making content is not an active job that I'm, directly getting paid for on an hourly basis. But pretty much from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed, almost the entire time I'm working on something or trying to work on something or thinking about working on something. Maybe I have, idea for a lesson, or I'm exploring something. I'm doing some research for something related to content I'm going to make. So yeah. Although not the same as somebody who works, say, 2 traditional jobs, if we include my content creation and all that, you could reasonably say that I work at least 10 to 12 hours a day, at least. Sometimes probably closer to 15, which leaves me, 9 hours of sleep. So yeah, there are definitely days like that where it's just maxed out. I'm just like, I don't even really get a break. If I eat, it might be like when I'm in between deliveries or something, so I don't even sit and watch anime or something like that. Yeah. Okay. So that's that. Full transparency. I like to be transparent with you guys, but yeah, I got a lot going on. And there are various reasons for that. I know some people say like, oh, you should just try to like, save up some money and then just like focus on one thing and build it. And I see value in that, but I'm not at a place right now where I can do that. So, as the channel picks up, hopefully, and we start making some more money from that, I can afford an editor, I can afford an assistant at some point. Then, like I'm trying to focus pretty much all my free time on the channel. And I generally do fairly well at that. I've been doing fairly well over the last couple of weeks. except for yesterday. But once that ball gets rolling and I don't have as much financial pressures, then whatever given thing I do, I can maybe spend a little bit more time on. But anyway, what's more likely to happen to the final D in hardened heart? I think I'd just drop it. So I'd go from the nasal D in den. Don't know what else to call it. Nasal D. If I remember right, you're a Portuguese speaker. Might be some interference here. There is no nasal D. You say you don't know what else to call it, so it's probably just not the best way to describe it. But it's just a D. Like, remember, there's vowel before, as Finn discovered, there's vowel before N, or before NT. And I've realized that all vowels at least can be, they don't have to, but they can be partially nasalized before N, M, and N, or M, N, and N. So it would be a partially nasalized eh. But we're talking about the D here. So I don't know how that is even relevant. So what's going to happen here, if you're saying it clearly enough, which we might in this particular case, you're just going to push out a weak D. Hardened heart. That's all it is. I don't think it's even possible to nasalize a D because it's a stop sound. Like the nasalized, like a nasal D or a nasal T would be an N because it's in the same position. It is also very common that if you have ND at the end, that we just drop the D. So you can actually say hardened heart. It's not the most clear thing, but especially given like the context, like these two words together, like it's most likely not going to sound strange unless you're speaking too slowly or enunciating too much. But if you're just speaking normally, he has a hardened heart. He has a hardened heart. Which, by the way, with harden, you can also do that sort of nasal plosive where we like hold the D and then push the N through, like in mountain for the T. But that doesn't affect the D at the end. Hardened heart. Yeah. Is there something else we can do there? Hardened heart. That's pretty much it. So I'm not sure what you're describing or trying to describe with like nasal D or whatever, but as far as I can think, there's only two things to do. Either you do a weak D or you drop the D. It's really hard to stop a D after an N, so we're probably not going to do that at all. It would either just be pronounced or dropped. Okay. Anyway, yes, exactly. Can you tell us how much time you work? Okay, so that was my correction. I sleep 8 to 10 hours a day. I sleep more, 9 to 12. 12 seems like a lot. I can see 10. I mean, it is what it is, but 12 seems like a lot. I used to sleep, like, when I didn't really have a job at all. And I would stay up really, really late because that's what I used to do a lot. I usually go to bed at like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. But let's see here. Maybe 10 hours. I can't even imagine sleeping 12 hours because I would still wake up at like 10, 11, maybe 12 o'clock, but I'd go to bed at like 3 or 4. So that's definitely not 12 hours. I have slept 12 hours before. I think I was really tired, especially after a lot of judo. But it's my shoulder. Okay. Anyway, 6 hours is so little. Yeah, 6 hours is not much. There's people who can get by because I know it has something to do with the gene. There's a particular gene that like codes for sleep. Obviously, there's a lot of factors to it, but I know there's some gene for it, and people who have like a modified version of that gene, they only need like 6 hours and they feel fine. So it's really stupid. The consequences are still rippling today. Does that sound okay? Yeah. There's no context there. I don't know what you're talking about, but use of ripple, consequences can ripple. It's fine. Yeah. I probably want a little more context to solidify it, but it works. And is there a reduced version of literally in fast speech, similar to like particularly? It's literally. Yeah, drop the T completely. Don't even flap it, and go from I to as a consonant, not as a vowel, which is going to make it a little shorter. So you would literally be saying literally, it's like lir. It actually, I guess it would kind of become like an L-colored I, literally, which does not work as an L-colored E in this case. That wouldn't work. Like literally, that doesn't work. But however you want to look at it, yeah, just go from it to and you definitely have to be speaking faster to do that. Even if you're not enunciating, if you're on the slower end of normal, like if I say, I literally just said that, it's a little odd, but definitely fast speech, no problem. So I literally just said that, literally. Like my brain is even, it's putting the flap D there for me. Like if I pay attention to it, I'm like, I know it's not there. I know I'm not forming it, but it almost like my brain is like, there's a T there. There's a flap D there. Like, I know it's there. It's this weird thing. That's part of what fast speech does. It hides some of those things and the brain fills in the details. So anyway, what I try to do instead of sleep less, I try to procrastinate less. Yeah, but that's hard. Sleeping is easy. Sleeping less is easy compared to procrastinating less. Because if I could sleep less and then watch anime, right? But yeah, procrastinating is a problem. If you're speaking fast, would you reduce? Made a mistake, Finn. I'm disappointed. You're past these mistakes. Would you reduced? No. That does not work. Would you reduce? Might just be a typo. But we can't put, if you said, would you have reduced, that would work. But no, it's would you reduce? So if you're speaking fast, would you reduce yesterday to yesterday? Okay, sorry. We talked about yesterday last live. I don't know if you were here. Yeah. I assume it's a typo. Not no. That's gonna start creating more of a British sound. You can get a really lazy R. Instead of saying like yester, right? Yesterday. He's like yesterday. It doesn't have to be a fully formed R, but it wouldn't be that would immediately sound British. We can do that if we're playing with the language. Like, oh, I saw him. What was that? I think it was yesterday. Was it yesterday? So, not normal speech. Yesterday. I saw him yesterday. That's something that could possibly work. There's other little variations and stuff, but they're going to revolve around dropping the T. Yeah, not reducing the I think we're not talking about too much. That's okay. Maybe you didn't get enough sleep. Thanks for sharing with your. Okay, so remove that. Like you changed it and then forgot to remove the first your. That's okay. Thanks for sharing with us your weekly activities. Yes. And it's great that you visit your grandparents regularly and help your mother by driving her. She wants. Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you. Alan is here. welcome. Do you hear the first O in omission as a regular schwa? All right. I love questions like this because it's another very natural opportunity for me to talk to you guys about real, actual speech and how it works, not the way that you guys are taught. Range, range, range. So articulation of sounds have a range. There's a fully articulated version, there's a lazy version, and everything in between. Which, by the way, there's a series of lessons coming up on how range works over the next, probably not definitely not this week. I'm really trying to catch up with some things, but next week I think it is, or the week after that is when I'm going to start that. What is this? This is the 24th. I guess it's supposed to start this week. Probably at the end of this week. I'm way behind on my plan for daily posting. I'm trying to catch up, and I just keep sinking farther and farther. But anyway, things. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So articulation of sounds have a range. Linking has a range in the sense of, like, say for example, t and y. You'll commonly hear that, like, okay, this can blend into ch. There are some cases where maybe it'll sound informal. Generally, it doesn't sound particularly informal. It's just normal speech. But that's one option, right? You can say t and y, like what you. That sounds very enunciated. We're probably not going to do that. That's one option. That's the clearly enunciated version of the range where there's no linking at all. You're just clearly saying both sounds. Then there's what you, right? So that's where we're blending the t and the n to ch. So as far as the linking between these two sounds go, it's not as clearly enunciated because we're blending, not separating them. So that's farther down the range, right? And then you also have the option to just stop the T and then push out the Y and you say, what you? That's another very common thing. There's no right answer. The t, yeah, fully enunciated is just unlikely because we're not usually going to take the time to fully enunciate unless we have a special reason. So that's just not common. Not wrong, but it's the least common. The ch, or stopping the T and then pushing out the Y, that's also in the range. There's two variations. They're both common. Whichever one comes out doesn't matter. Okay, so that's just an example of how linking can have sort of a range of what might happen. Very simply, the range in linking would be either not linking or linking. But here we actually have two possibilities. I guess technically stopping it and then pushing out the Y is not linking it. We're just, instead of saying t, we're stopping it. But either way, you get the point. There's multiple options. There's a range of options of what can happen between saying it or changing something, right? More than one possibility. Now, that also applies to words. Words have ranges as well. And I know this starts to sound a little complicated, like, oh my God, how am I supposed to learn all this? Don't worry about it. It's not that complicated. Pay attention to how people speak. Listen very closely. Shadow people. You're going to start to notice patterns. You're going to start to notice, hey, I notice sometimes when people say what and you, sometimes I hear it as ch, sometimes I hear it with a stop T, sometimes I hear it with a regular T. You might come and ask me a question, say, hey, what's going on there? And then I tell you, oh, this is what's going on. And now you know. And then you're like, oh, cool. And then you're done, right? Like, you know that thing now. But you want to pay attention to the living language. That exposure is going to be the biggest thing that helps you. Now, when we're talking about range of words, there are some words, like, say, for example, about. Don't worry, I'm going to get to omission here in a second. Where that first syllable is right? It's just a little schwa sound. If I say it clearly, it could be it's fine, but about. Now, in this case, that first syllable happens to be a little schwa. It's not a reduction. That's just the sound that is used in that syllable of that word. But then we have a word like, say, to. Okay, and the full form of the word, fully enunciated form of the word, has a T and an U sound, not an O, or not an O, but definitely not an O. Spelled with an O, but it's not an O sound. As an U sound, not an sound. However, we know that it's most common to reduce it from U to and so we get t. Now that, saying to or saying t, As far as the vowel part goes, that's a range. There's the fully articulated, fully enunciated version of the word, which would be a T with an O, 2. That is the only way to say it fully enunciated, fully articulated. Okay, 2. Then we know that we don't tend to do that, right? But that's the only way to do it that way. Very commonly, we reduce the U to Now, can the U still come out as O? No, it can't, not as O. Can the still come out as U at any given time? It's possible, not likely, possible. Of course, if we have a special reason for this or that, maybe you can do that. But there's 2 options, one of which is much more likely, which is the reduction. Okay, but neither of them are wrong. If you always use "oo," this is the problem, because you could just say, well, I'll just always use the "oo." Problem with that is if you do that every time, because "to" is such a common word, it's going to stand out and you're not going to sound natural. So if you want to sound natural, you can't do that. That's the unfortunate part. If you don't care about sounding natural, don't say "to," just always say "to." Problem solved. Of course, we know that the T can change into a flat D or just a regular D, depending on the sound before it. That's also part of the range of the word. And then we get different combinations, like I've talked about before. You have "to," "ta," "do," "da," "ru," "ra," with the flat D, depending on what's before it, blah, blah, blah. So we actually have like 6 combinations of what could happen. And obviously, if you don't have a voice sound before the T, you can't just change it to a D. So there's certain requirements of sounds affecting sounds. But potentially, we have 6 options, and as long as certain conditions are met, it doesn't matter which one comes out. Like if the sound before it, say it's go, most likely we're going to reduce U to we're going to change the T into flap D. It'd be goda, goda. That's the single most common pronunciation that you probably hear. Can you say go to? Yes. Can you say go to? Yes. Can you say go to? Yes. None of them are wrong. This is all a range of possibilities for this particular word. This particular word is a little complicated because there's so many possibilities, but that's the point. I want you to get the concept. Okay, this is how real American speech works. Due to how the stress of the language works, how the rhythm of the language works, how we commonly get reductions, that's one big factor. And then due to the fact that some sounds can affect other sounds, like say a voice sound changing the T and "to" into a D sound, and the fact that "to" is a very common word, it's very, very easy to manipulate between those different factors, and you get multiple possibilities. Range, range, range. So that's an example of a range of a word. Now, to finally answer your question, I know I'm horrible. Omission. The funny thing, the interesting thing, that as a native speaker, I seem to have some special insight that you guys might not get, because if you go to the dictionary, I've noticed some cases. I can't think off the top of my head of any examples. Let's see if this is actually an example. I think believe might be a good example too. Omission. Interesting. Look at believe. Okay. This is another problem. I've decided that at some point for sure. At first, it was an idea, but I'm going to do this at some point. I have no idea when. I would need the resources for it. I'm going to make an English Hacks phonetic dictionary, a pronunciation dictionary that has, as many words as possible. I will probably also try to include the IPA for those of you who care, but again, I don't like the IPA. It's not always going to match up perfectly, because like I use the Cot merger, and if you see the IPAA is at the merged or the unmerged, it's the same symbol. So you see we get some problems. But that aside, I'm going to make an English Hacks phonetic dictionary at some point. When you go to the dictionary, there's 2 problems. When it comes to the range of possibilities. So if you go, I want to use believe first. I know I'm horrible at actually getting to the question itself, but if I like using believe as a simple example here, because if you go to the dictionary, at least the dictionary I'm looking at, it says that believe is be. It uses the I like an it, right? And then the second syllable is the stress syllable, and it's leave, right? So believe. Now, the reality, what I was mentioning when I was saying how like the advantage I have as a native speaker, what I would say is that the fully formed, fully enunciated version of this word isn't with be, it's with be. Um, believe. It can come out that way if you're enunciating, if you're emphasizing the word. I don't believe it. Does it have to do that? No. You can still say be. Um, and then further, we can reduce to believe, believe. Now, the dictionary, again, at least this dictionary, maybe there's some other dictionaries that give us some other answers or more possibilities, but unless you're going to check 5 different dictionaries, that's not really relevant. So in this particular dictionary, it just gives that one option. It doesn't tell us any reduction information. It doesn't tell us the possibility to say be. It just says that one bit. That's the only option it gives. So you as an English learner, you go to the dictionary, you look that up, and you're like, oh, okay, I have to use bit. And then you always say bit, and then you hear people, wait, did I hear them say it? Did I hear somebody say E? Is that a regional thing? What's going on here? Right? So that's part of the problem. It doesn't always show you the reductions. And it doesn't always show you the possible fully enunciated version, even though that's what the dictionary is kind of supposed to do. Now, for omission, it also does not list the reduction. Okay, it lists O as the first vowel or the first sound per syllable, which is correct. Fully formed, fully enunciated version of the word, we use O, omission. That was an omission. However, the much more common way to say the word, it's not a particularly common word, but I would say that probably a more common way to say the word would be to reduce that O to omission. He made an omission. Now that can also sound like the pronunciation of this word, in which case it would sound the same. Because emission, that would be an actual E there, like the emissions from a car. You could also possibly say emission. We'd probably say Same thing with omission. Now, in order to make it very, very clear, you might push out that O. That's fine. But if you're just speaking normally, could come out as an O, could come out as an doesn't matter. It's the range of one word. So your question was, do you hear the first O in omission as regular schwa? I hear it as O, and I hear it as See, it's a lot of these questions, and I think this is because sometimes it's fine. Like the questions are fine. You guys ask great questions, but I think sometimes the way some of the questions that you ask, not you specifically, Alan, but English learners, some of the specifics that are asked, some of the questions that are asked, or maybe the ways that some of the questions are asked, I think are rooted in the way that this stuff is normally taught in sort of like a very simple, like, oh, you form the E sound this way, or this word is oh, blah, blah, blah. And then you get a question and you're like, wait, could it be a schwa? I think I hear people use a schwa. Could it be omission? I don't know. Because nobody teaches you that. Right? Now, obviously, no teacher is going to go there and, list every single word in the English language with all the possible, reductions or changes that could happen, this and that, whatever. That would be impossible and a waste of both my time and your time. It's not the best way to do it. But I think the way that things are normally taught, whether that comes from a linguistics perspective or just the way that most teachers tend to teach these things, which is not necessarily the teacher's fault, it's kind of the nature of the problem. But I think the way that it's normally taught is it makes you think that there's one answer. There's one option. There's the way that it's supposed to be. And if there's anything in this world that does not work that way, it's American English. There's almost always more than one answer. And it depends on exactly what we're talking about, right? Obviously, not every word has multiple pronunciations. That would be standard, right? You might get dialects or different accents, but it's not that crazy. But this does exist because of reductions, right? If there's a reduction, it doesn't mean that the reduction is the answer. It just means that the reduction is probably going to be the most common way to pronounce it. That's how you want to think about this, right? When you learn a reduction, don't think of the reduction as the answer. It's not the way to pronounce it. It's just the most common way to pronounce it. You will still hear it not reduced sometimes. You will still hear other things. And you should learn the reductions if you want to sound natural. But don't get caught in this perspective of it's the way to do it, because it's not. It's kind of hard to explain, but I'm talking about the DN sound in... Oh, okay. I guess that makes a little more sense if you're talking about nasal D. Yeah, so that's that nasal plosive. Yeah, like garden, harden, garden, harden. See, but that affects that first D. Were you asking about the first D or the second D? No, because you said to the H. So we're going into the H in heart, right? If you try to make the second D, especially after already doing it in the first D, but if you try to make that the second D, to make this easier on myself, I'll go ahead and change the first D into just a regular D. Hardened. It's not possible. There's no way that we would do that, because the only way that you can do the D, like in harden garden, is if there's a D followed by an N. You can't do that with the last D because there's no N after it, right? So it's you just wouldn't be saying hardened heart. If anything, you'd be saying like hardened nart. But even then, obviously, nart isn't a word. Hardened nart. Even then, I don't think we would do it there between words like that. So no, it doesn't. Don't try to say it that way. You're trying to do something that doesn't exist. Yeah, don't do that. Definitely don't do that. As I said, it's either a weak D or it's a drop D. It's a typo. You are not forgiven, Finn. You will never be forgiven for this this little tiny mistake of an accidental additional stroke on the keyboard. What were you thinking? You are forever a failure in English. I don't care if you sound like a native. You're done. You're done. Right. Now, obviously, this is an extreme case, but that's actually the reality for like any mistakes. You could be a beginner making grammar mistakes, and we feel like it's the end of the world. I know Finn doesn't. Finn, maybe it's a little embarrassing, but I don't think you really care. We all make typos, but all mistakes are like that. Like it's not the end of the world. It doesn't matter. You're not a failure. I made too many typos. This is what you do when you work 2 jobs for 14 hours a day and join a live chat. Yeah. I imagine, yeah. I'd probably make a lot more typos too. I mean, I'm not even typing most of the time, and half the things I try to type into the chat just have typos. So there you go. It would have been fun if you would have been the one, and it would have been fun if you had been the one. I can kind of feel the difference, but I can't put my finger on it. I hate this question. I'm not going to do a deep dive on this one because reasons, but it's possible that the first one is not grammatically correct. Regardless, the reason why I hate this question is because, like, if I'm just speaking as a native speaker, like, I'm going to generally use things correctly. I don't have to think about it. But when I think about this, honestly, it kind of like my brain gets sort of twisted and I get a little confused with some things, and I'm like, well, that sounds okay, but it can't be okay. It's just, there's something, what? Like, so I gotta work some details out here. But a simple answer of like, what's the difference and do they both work? They do both work, yes. What's the difference It would have been fun if you would have been the one. It would have been fun if you had been the one. First one sounds kind of redundant. Like you're being overly hypothetical. The second one just sounds like a regular statement, basic grammar. The first one, like would have, especially because you're keeping same subject, or well, it's not same subject. It's yeah, no, I guess it's because we're okay. My brain is not working right. See, I told you it breaks my brain. It would have been fun if you would have been the one. Yeah, there's something about that I'm just like, eh. Like I can imagine somebody saying it, but it almost kind of has an effect of like instead of saying like it's too much, it's like you're saying it's too much. Like that can work if you want to emphasize. uh, but normally, like we wouldn't say it's too much. Like just it's too much, right? So probably we would say like it would have been fun if you had been the one. I don't know. That's the best explanation I have right now. I'm getting a 404 error, so we'll move on. Actually, I make more mistakes in a live chat. Like you can see my mistake above the procrastinating. Yeah. I didn't even pick up on that. There's a lot of little things that in writing that like our brains will just skip over. So I didn't even notice that you made any mistakes here. Either that or I noticed it and I just kind of corrected it myself in my head. I don't know. That's weird. Maybe you have all the pressure from all 5 people here who are currently watching, according to what YouTube is telling me. It doesn't tell me who, so don't feel weird, but it says there are 5 people here. By the way, it's a fun little phrase I found in a poem. Hurt, hardened heart. Yeah, that's a mouthful. Hurt, hardened heart. Hurt, hardened heart. Hurt, hardened heart. Hardened heart. Harden, harden, harden. Hurt, hardened heart. Hurt, hardened heart. Yeah, especially given all the H's and the R sounds, the easiest way to say that would probably the single most common way to say this combination. Hurt, we're gonna stop that T. Hurt, hardened heart. Hurt, hardened heart. So that D at the end of hardened would pretty much guaranteed be dropped. Just statistically. This one is very useless. Let's say useful. This one is very useless. Well, why are you asking a useless question? But you know how you may push out the T in what if you're mad? Okay. Can you link the word quotation marks, sir? You're not giving my brain the information it needs to parse this written script. Okay. There we go. Thank you. I'm just like, what is going on here? Okay. Can you link the word what to the word you with that T without turning it into a CH, stopping it or dropping it? Isn't that all the options? Okay, hold on. Okay, so can you link it without it turning into a ch, without stopping it, and without dropping it? Oh yeah, dropping it is another possibility. I forgot to mention earlier when I was talking about that. So basically, you're asking, can you enunciate the T but still link? Like, is that? I guess that would be the question. So instead of like, what if you're mad, saying like, what if you're mad? Sort of like that. That's the only way that I understand your question. So please verify that that's what you're asking for. Well, I wouldn't move the T over to the Y. That's not the perceptual boundary I would put there. What you? I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So kind of like, oh, did I say what if? Yeah, we're talking about the Y. Stupid me. Yeah, what you? Okay. So basically what I said, but with a Y, and not aspirated like a weak T. Uh, what you? What you? What you? Is it possible? Yes. That is probably going to be even less likely than separating the words. Like if I say what you want, that's going to be more likely than doing a weak T that sort of moves over. What you? What you? But it does exist. It can happen, yes. But it's especially because we have these other options where we can blend, we can stop, we can drop. That makes it even less likely that we would use that option. So there's so many options. Plus, we don't like to do that. Tja, 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 tja. Yeah, like in American English at least. Obviously, there's some cases where there's like a t and a y between each other or together, but I don't think we like to put those together as like an actual T and a Y. We'll do one of those other variations. Yeah, that's why I told you it's pretty useless. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a decent question. It's actually a very obvious question because you're like, well, there's this and this and this and this. What about this? Like, what about just using a T? The one thing that you would expect to happen. Can we do that? The answer is technically yes, but no, not really. um, Q. Yeah, I don't think we like to do that, whether it's inside of a word or between words. I don't think we like to put t and y together as like fully formed sounds. Um, that's interesting. There might be cases, but I don't know. One possible thing I could say, maybe like if you're one of the people, this is I think is definitely more of a British thing, but apparently there are some Americans who do it, like the word stupid, or they'll say like stupid, stupid. Of course, there's an S before it that's kind of weakening it, making it sound kind of like a D. So there's also that. Um, anyway, I don't know. We still got some time today, guys. The chat has died. We're down to 2 people. Oh my god. I'm just so unentertaining. Like, I don't know. Let's actually talk about that with the 2 people that are here. Obviously, the easy thing for me to do is say, hey, let's have a live stream. And then I could just answer your questions. We all have school tomorrow. I guess so. Yeah. In the Southern Hemisphere. That would also make sense. I didn't even think about that because I haven't been a student for a long time. But yeah, it's winter for you. Everyone must be freaking out, I guess. It's always so strange to think about. Like, how did that be winter? Anyway, but yeah, so I don't know. The easy thing for me to do with these lives is to answer your questions. But then sometimes, actually, a lot of the time, especially if Wendell's here, we end up filling up the whole time, and that's fine. But I also noticed that, like, yeah, I'm still a small channel. There's not a whole lot of people that come to these. Like we tend to usually get a lot of the same people, which is great. But it's like, because I occasionally see the number of people, and it'll go up. Sometimes it'll be a little higher, sometimes it'll be a little lower. But it's not like, you go to some channels and it's like, oh, there's like 1,000 people here. Like, I think the most people I've ever had watching a live stream at one point was maybe 20. And I think I'm being very generous there. Like, I haven't even hit 50. So it's kind of like, why am I doing this? So I don't know if there's like something else I can do aside from just answer questions, but what do you imagine your viewers' ages are? I don't have to imagine. I have data. Some of the great things about YouTube. Of course, it's anonymized data. I don't know any specific details about specific people. But if I go to my analytics, that was weird. And we go to, what am I looking for here? Audience. It even tells me the most common times that most people tend to be on YouTube for the people who view my channel, which is, it looks like it's generally between like my time, 4 a.m. to 1 p.m. So I have that. And apparently you guys don't tend to use YouTube as much on Wednesdays. Top geographies, surprisingly, United States, 17%, followed by India, Brazil, Vietnam, Canada. Tells me top subtitles that are used. 87% use no subtitles. 9.8% use English subtitles. Subscribers, I was going to say two things at once. Subscribers versus non-subscribers. This is always interesting because the not subscribed is always slightly higher than subscribed. You guys need to subscribe. Don't just watch the content. But I mean, if I haven't made something worthy enough for you to subscribe to, then don't subscribe. But still, 51.9% right now are not subscribed. Not subscribed. That makes sense because I'm doing a big content push and I'm getting a lot more views. But gender, 70.3% male. So this is a largely male audience, which is very strange to me. I guess it kind of makes some sense since I have like some nerdy references and stuff, but not that females can't be nerds. It's just in my experience, like most of the people in my sort of nerdy circle are men. And I would expect if I'm referencing Pokemon and, science fiction and fantasy and whatever that might come up, stereotypically, it might be more of a male interest. I don't know. I can't explain it. Whatever reason. 70% of you are male. And then ages. So 18 to 24 years old is about 30%. 25 to 34 years old is 31.5%. 35 to 44 years old is about 21%. So between 18 and 44, especially 18 to 34, but 18 to 44 is, if I could do math, but I can't. So that'd be 61, 62, 63, 83. So about 83% are between the age of 18 and 44. Which also makes sense to me. Good to know I'm getting some Gen Zers, though. I'm not completely irrelevant due to my references. Now, if I were to take an actual average age, I don't know, I have to do math. The single biggest group, 31.5%, is between 25 and 34. That's almost a third of the entire audience between 25 and 34. So that's probably going to be roughly where the average lies, given that the group before that is actually, that's almost a third also. It's almost 30%. So if I were to go in between those, throw in a very rough piece for that. Slightly adjust for the upper range. I would roughly say about 30 years old would be the average age of my viewer. I'm very bad at math, but I tend to be very good at approximating for some reason. So based off of the numbers I was looking at in the process I went through my head, I would say roughly speaking, if I were to put a specific number, probably be around 30, give or take a couple of years. Which makes sense because I'm going to be 33 this year, and I'm a millennial, and I like referencing Pokemon and nerdy stuff. And so, there's going to be a lot of people more or less around my age that might see, hey, he's using Pikachu in his videos. This guy's cool. I'm going to watch him. So, I don't know. Oh my God, Finn really took over the chat. Yeah. I mean, where'd you guys go? Like, what the heck? Finn was here to hold the fort. I don't know who else was here because it said there were 2 people here. Finn was one of them. Somebody's watching from the shadows. Mr. Y is here. Welcome, Mr. Y. Mr. Y. It's an interesting name. Mr. Y. So is it like Mr. Y as in like the Y stands, it's like the first letter of a name, or is it Y like WHY, that question mark? Mr. Y, sort of like Doctor Who. It's like the off brand of Doctor Who. So instead of traveling in a time machine that looks like a British police public call box, you I don't know, you travel through time and space in a cardboard box. I don't know. Trying to do something with that, but Mr. Y. I really like that name for some reason. Very simple, very mysterious. No teenagers. No teenagers. Yeah, so the 13 to 17-year-old bracket is 0.4%. And that makes sense to me mainly because those of you who aren't in YouTube, like you don't make content for YouTube, especially if you weren't around making content a couple of years ago, you probably are not very familiar with the whole issue of children on YouTube, especially the COPPA Act that was passed. So yeah, there were issues where like, not necessarily that it's, all completely really bad, but there's, topics, there's all kinds of topics on YouTube, right? Some of it is sensitive, some of it is not so sensitive. Some of it is, for like serious topics for a mature audience. Some are, maybe more for kids. People make kids content, and stuff like that. And so there is this big thing at one point where like kids were being shown content that their parents didn't want them to see, and this and that, and the algorithm, is just like recommending stuff, blah, blah, blah. And so they came up with this whole like, they basically try to like separate kids YouTube from the rest of YouTube, essentially, which caused a lot of damage to a lot of creators. Children are not my target audience, luckily, so I didn't really get affected by that. But YouTube is naturally probably not going to recommend my content to children. Even every video I upload, there's an option. I have it set to the right option, so I don't have to do it every time. But there's an option that you can check to say like not made for kids, and that doesn't mean that that kids can't watch it. It just means it's not targeted at kids. So that's probably why. Because if I don't check that, then there might be some issues, and YouTube doesn't want there to be issues. So I just mark that it's not made for kids because that's not my target audience. But anyway, when you don't have to lie about your age anymore. Wait, hold on. I missed something. Oh, can I use an actual question? Thank you, Alan. Can I use dark L all the time? Technically, yes. Unless you enunciate. That's something that exists in American English. It's a little tricky to do if it's the first sound. All right, so if I say Luke, right? Luke is a name. If I'm Darth Vader and I say, Luke, I am your father, right? Which was never said, by the way, in the movie. It's one of those weird pop culture things that never actually happened. So if I say Luke, I'm very likely to just use a regular full light L, full consonant. If I start the sentence quickly enough and lazily enough, I could still use a dark L. You can say, Luke, I am your father. Luke, 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 Luke. It's almost kind of like just an ooh, but there's an ult in there. Remember, speed can kind of hide things. So it's a little bit tricky. If it's the first sound, like you have a pause or you don't have anything before a word that starts an L, I would recommend just for clarity and for ease of pronunciation, just doing a L. That's fine. But at any other point, you never really have to use the light L sound. I wonder if I should make a lesson about that. The L hack. I think I'll do that. Add it to the list. Ugh. Like, you guys don't even know. Oh, it's on Friday now. L hack. I have this content creation calendar, which I'm like a week behind on. And I just created it like 3 weeks ago. So, but anyway, I have this content creation calendar, and a lot of it is like extra practice and minimal pair stuff, but I have not all main content, but I have content planned out as far as September 10th. Will I be able to stick to that? We'll see. But that's what I have planned. Most teenagers lie about their age when they create their accounts. Yeah, I imagine. I mean, very rarely, if ever, is there anything in my content that wouldn't be suitable for someone who's younger in terms of something that might be offensive or shocking or something. It's just not my it's not my type of content, so I don't really care. When you don't have to lie about your age anymore, you know that your life is going downhill. I created this account when I was 7. It's been 9 years. Wow, so you are 16. So young. Finn is so young. I wouldn't have guessed that. Would not have guessed that. I was thinking maybe 20 something. They grow so fast. I guess they grow young so fast, because a second ago in my mind you were 20 something, now you're 16. You're Benjamin Button. Tomorrow you're going to be 2. Anyway. Yeah. Could you please pronounce I didn't know in fast English? Are both D's in didn't flapped? It's actually Mr. Y. Because I'm curious. I keep questioning everything since childhood. I like that. That's an even better thing than I came up with. That's perfect. You should always question everything. It's the way to live life. Okay. Like I was saying before, I think probably before you were here, I don't want you to get into the trap, the perspective of thinking that there's one answer, because American English doesn't work that way most of the time. Right, there's a reason. There's a couple of reasons, but there's a reason why we have multiple versions of the stop sounds, and that can create all kinds of things that happen. But are both D's and didn't flapped? Okay, the second D for sure. Now, does it have to be? Technically not. I could enunciate. I could say, I didn't know. Didn't know. Possible. Possible. Most likely, that second D is going to be flapped. It's not the answer. It's just the most likely answer. The first D, that's a little bit of a trick. So didn't, obviously, it's kind of grammary. It's a grammary part. Right? You're saying did not. Not is a content word. Negatives are content words. So not is stressed. When it combines with didn't, we're obviously removing the vowel from not, and so the stress transfers to the did, and then we just have this nt at the end, which is not stressed. So didn't. Okay. So then we have a D at the first D would be a D at the start of a stressed syllable, so it should be strong. It should be D. Right? However, it doesn't seem that that is a solid 100% necessary rule, especially when we're talking about grammar words like do and don't. Especially if they're purely functional, because do could be a main verb. Do could also be just like using a question. Do you like it? So what I've noticed is that, especially if you're speaking quickly, but even if you're not necessarily speaking quickly, it is possible to make the first D a flap D. Now, if it's the first word, okay, flap D does not exist as a first sound. It just doesn't. Okay, that's why it's really, really hard when teaching the flap D sound. It's really hard to produce it in isolation, like da da da. It just it feels weird. It's hard to do. It's probably not coming out quite right because it always exists with something before it and something after, particularly a vowel. There must be a vowel before it and a vowel after it. So if, say, you ask a question like a negative question, like didn't you know, you would never, ever, 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 ever make that first D a flap. If you try to say like it didn't, you know, it didn't, like it's just it doesn't work as hard. It's difficult. But if I say I didn't know, I didn't know, I didn't know. Possible, it sounds okay. Now, particularly because we have the two Ds here, and especially if you end up flapping the first one, there's another thing that we can do with the second D, whether you flap the first one or not. In the word didn't, you can actually say didn't. What we're doing there is we're closing into that TDN position because it's all the same position, not touching the teeth, right? We're doing that sort of nasal plosive held D. So we go into the D, but it doesn't get released. And instead, it gets redirected through the nose. So it gets caught for a second and then goes through the nose. And then pronouncing the T at the end is 100% optional. If it comes out, it's fine. You can add it as a glottal stop if you want, but you can just drop it completely. So you're basically saying like di, and then when you go back into that D position, you don't actually pronounce the D at all. You just do like, basically, it's not a straight N. It's not din, right? But it's did. So it has to kind of push a little explosively through the nose. And that's it. Didn't. That's probably the most common way to pronounce that word. But there's a lot of variations with like stopping the T, dropping the T, flapping the second D, or doing the sort of nasal plosive combination with the D in the second one. There's probably, off the top of my head, I would guess there's probably like 7 or 8 ways that the word didn't might be pronounced, based on all the different possibility factors that we have. So yeah, that's real speech. It's real speech. Now it all operates within certain boundaries. Like you're not going to change the second D into an S, right? So it might seem chaotic and crazy, but there are things that work here. It's just there's multiple things that can apply, and that's what gives us a lot of variation. Anyway, 16-year-old person likes language learning unique. Hey, I started trying to teach myself Japanese when I was 13. All right. So 16 sounds fine. Of course, I wasn't particularly successful, but I did try to start. Started trying to learn basic kana and about this stupid Japanese book that was like, I learned some stuff from it, we'll say that, but it definitely wasn't the best resource. It was all in like Romanized characters. There was no actual like Japanese writing in it. But anyway, hello from Egypt. Well, welcome. Sorry if it took me a second to get to you there, but I try to go through the chat. Sometimes I linger on things, and I apologize. I thank you for your patience. But yes, welcome, Joe. I'm not even going to try to say the second name because I'm probably not going to say it right. But yes, welcome. New subscriber, always glad to have you. I see you have a question down there. I'll get to that in a second. Egypt is cool. Abdullah, aren't you from Egypt? I don't know. I don't remember where you're from specifically. But that would just be funny if you're from Egypt because you're like, hey. Anyway, I don't know why as teenagers are into language learning. I feel like me being able to speak 4 languages at 16 is way more impressive than it would be if I were, say, 23. Probably. I mean, but at the same time, being able to speak 4 languages at any age is kind of impressive. So you're just kind of splitting hairs there. Like, come on. It's particularly impressive with the way languages tend to be taught. I don't even know how people do it. Well, I mean, I do know how, but there's the traditional system is definitely more of a barrier than not. Speak. It's a typo. What did you say? See, I didn't even read that. Oh yeah, I did notice that my eyes kept lingering there, and my brain was like, "That's misspelled." But consciously, I was talking. I didn't realize enough to point it out. Okay, Joe. Why? So it's a question. Why can't I? I'm gonna switch it. That's okay. Why can't I understand the person who speaks English, although I know all the words he says? Fantastic question, sir. Fantastic question. This is one of the best questions ever. Okay. This is a common problem. Anybody who learns enough of a language, I guess I can't say anybody, it depends on their approach, but most people who don't really know what they're doing when they go to learn a language, they take classes, they do this and that, blah, blah, they learn words, they learn grammar. Okay. Most people, now that's Spanish. You're just confusing me. I don't know what to think now. You're from Egypt and you're speaking Spanish. Anyway, so most people, right, learning any language, they run into this problem. And there is an explanation for this. Okay. First point, I want you to engrave this into like the neural pathways of your brain. Okay, I want you to literally take a pen, stick it in. No, don't do that. But engrave this into your brain. Okay, very first point. It's going to seem like maybe it's kind of, okay, sure, but does that really matter? It's a lot more important than it might seem at first. Okay, knowledge. Sorry, you're lucky that I didn't say. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to read that. So, gracias. Number one thing, engrave in your brain. Okay, knowledge is not skill. Knowledge is not skill. And especially with the way that languages tend to be taught, things are kind of getting better, but the way that languages tend to be taught, especially if you go to like a school, it's just like a general school, you take English 101, whatever, but it's just another subject along with your math and science. That's like the worst case. Language tends to be taught in a very academic way. It tends to be taught in a very skill-based way where you have to take tests and do this thing and blah, blah, blah. And the result that usually comes out of that, even if you don't do that, like that, because that's the way that academics works. Like if you're learning history, that's knowledge. It's not a skill, right? Math has some skill to it. It's taught as knowledge, and that makes it horrible for a lot of people. But a lot of things that you learn in school, like biology, science, history, they're not skills. And there's a way to teach knowledge that works perfectly fine, that if you apply it to learning skills, it becomes horrible and painful and not efficient at all. And this is usually the problem people get, because even if you don't take actual classes, the way that you were taught in school, you're like, okay, well, I need to get a textbook or a learning resource, and I need to go and I need to memorize these things. And especially with a language, right? You think, well, okay, how do I learn a language? If you know nothing about language learning, you think, how do I learn a language? Well, okay, so languages have words. Okay, so I need words. Got it. I need to know how to say things. All right. And then there's grammar, because I need to know how to put those words together, right? As soon as you start, even if you know nothing about language learning, you're very quickly going to realize you need words and you need to know how to put those words together. Vocabulary and grammar. Okay, that's true. Nothing wrong with that. Great insight. And then what you do, you go and you proceed and you try to memorize the grammar rules, and you try to memorize a bunch of vocabulary, usually in isolation. Like, you know, this word in my language is this word in that language. Blah, like gato, cat, playa, beach. Okay, it's a worse way to learn vocabulary. Well, almost the worst way. It's a very, very bad way to learn vocabulary. But that aside, you go and you memorize words and you memorize grammar. And then, usually after 4 years of taking classes for that language, you think that you're doing pretty good, right? You passed some tests, maybe you got straight A's through all 4 years, and then you speak with an actual native speaker of that language who may not even be speaking very informally. They're just like, maybe they know that you're an English learner. They're speaking to you, maybe not super slowly, but they're not using any fancy reductions or contractions. They're just speaking the language. And you're like, I don't understand. Especially if you listen to actual real speech between natives and it has nothing to do with you being a language learner, then you're really lost. And you're just like, I don't understand. I learned all these words and I learned all this grammar. Maybe even I learned some pronunciation, and I can't understand people. There's a reason for that. Again, going back to knowledge is not skill. You could pass a C2 level grammar test. You could literally know all of the grammar rules better than the average native speaker. And you could memorize and be able to instantly translate, say, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 words. You could even maybe be able to read a book with little to no problem. But knowledge is not skill. It doesn't matter if you have that knowledge. Now, can that knowledge help you? Yes. But by the same token, you could study no grammar rules ever in your entire life. You could formally study and try to memorize no vocabulary in your entire life and still come out the other end as a fluent, natural sounding speaker. So clearly there's something going on here between knowledge and skill. My personal opinion and approach is that targeting the right knowledge, the right grammar and vocabulary in the most efficient way, which is going to vary a little bit from person to person, but targeting it like the bigger pieces, the most useful pieces, using the 80-20 principle to help speed up the skill acquisition is the best balance, instead of completely ignoring grammar. But knowledge is not skill. Okay. Knowing the grammar is not the same as being able to use it. It's not the same as being able to understand it. And that brings me to my second point: input and output. This applies to any skill. It could be music, programming, language learning, art, it doesn't matter. There's always an input and there's an output, okay? This creates, this depends on two fundamental, well, let me rephrase that. It, just like input and output go together, right? If I'm having a conversation with you, I say something to you, you say something to me, I have to listen and understand it, and I say something back, right? So I'm giving you output, which is input for you. You're giving me output, which is input for me, and we have a conversation. If it's written, then it's the same thing, but without sound, with symbols. Okay, that's also another important point. But input versus output. Okay. One common problem that people have is, say your listening is pretty good. You go watch a TV show, you can follow along. Maybe you don't understand everything, but you understand enough. You can enjoy it. No big deal. But you go to speak and you can't speak. But you say, I know the grammar, I know the vocabulary, I can watch TV shows, but I can't speak. And that's because input for spoken language is based on the ears, okay? You have to be able to have sounds come into your brain. Your brain has to interpret those sounds, make them into meaningful stuff. So if I say tree, your brain has to hear ch or e, put that sequence together. You have to know the word, obviously, because if you don't know the word, then you just hear the sound. But you have to know the word. You hear the sounds. Your brain knows that that sequence of sounds together refers to this object that we call a tree. Your brain works its magic by getting input through the ears because it's sound-based. We're talking about spoken language. Okay, that's one skill. Speaking and listening, input and output, are two different skills. Okay, just because you improve one, obviously they're related, right? An improvement in one will probably help the other to some extent, but you'd be surprised. They are two separate skills. It seems, I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm not an expert on this, but it seems that the production of the language or skill, whatever it is, and the perception of the language are actually handled by different parts of the brain. So you don't just magically start being able to speak the language. Now, there are some interesting cases like this. Obviously babies are different. We're not talking about babies. You're sort of designed to boot the language into your brain. But there are cases like, say, Matt versus Japan, where, again, I don't know his whole story, but it seems like he largely focused on just massive amounts of exposure and input. And then he kind of got the language into him. And Steve Kaufman kind of talks about that too. But he did still have to practice speaking a little bit, but when he went to start speaking, he had already had so much input that things were kind of coming to him. He had to sort of actually practice saying them. He had to maybe make some changes here and there from what popped up in his brain, but ready formed pieces of languages were coming to his brain, or of the language in Japanese, were coming to his brain. But in his case, if I remember right, he spent like he basically isolated himself. Like he was just like all day, like 8 hours a day consuming Japanese content, native Japanese content. Not everybody can do that. So that pathway may exist where the input will eventually translate into output. But I think for the average person, it's not a practical approach. And so at the end of the day, input and output are not the same. They're two different skills. Okay. Furthermore, language in particular, this is a big thing that gets all mixed up, and it's okay to mix them to some extent, but you have to understand the reality here. English has language learning has two input-output pairs. This is the thing. I mean, it's so obvious. These things are just so obvious that we don't think about them, but it's actually important. Not every skill has two input-output pairs. Music is another good example that has two input-output pairs because you can read music, you can hear music, right? But the output would be from the instrument, whether it's coming through your eyes or your ears. The output, like you're playing the guitar, it's still going through your hands, right? So that's sort of like two different possible inputs with one output. Language learning is different. It has two separate input-output pairs. You have the ears, that's the sense organ for spoken language. And then you have the mouth, which is the production organ for spoken language. For writing, you have the eyes, which are the sense organ for written language. And then you have the hands, which are the production organ for written language. Two completely different pairs. Now, can you mix listening and reading? Yes, you can. There's potential benefits to that. But there are some potential issues, like one of the reasons I hate the IPA, because people end up using it as a crutch. They don't actually develop their ears for the spoken language. What the IPA really tries to do, which again, the IPA in itself is fine. I'm not going to go into all that again as a tool for linguists. It's a really great tool. But within the context of language learning, aside from an initial analysis of what sounds exist in the new language, I very strongly recommend that nobody ever uses it for language learning, because even no matter how accurate of a symbol you might have, a sound is not a symbol. You're using your eyes instead of your ears. You can instead develop your ears better, train your ears better to actually perceive the sound itself instead of having to go and use a visual reference. That is a problem. Now, if you don't care, if you want to go to the dictionary 10 times a day because you have to double check the sound, fine. If you like the IPA and you want to use it as a tool and you just prefer it, fine. But this is a real thing, and your perception of, say, the difference between E and I, and A, whatever, does have an impact on your general listening ability. If you can't hear the difference between those sounds, it's going to be harder to understand what you hear, right? So Joe's question, what was Joe's question? Was it Joe? I think it was Joe. I don't even know where I am anymore. Yeah, so why can't I understand the person who speaks English? So the other part of this is ear training, the perception at the most fundamental level of being able to hear, oh, this is an E sound, not an I sound. There are many languages that don't even have the sound I. Like Spanish doesn't have I. So when a Spanish speaker learns English, they'll usually replace all of the I sounds with E's, and they literally don't even hear. Like I can say I very clearly to them, and they'll hear E because their brain doesn't make a distinction between E and I. But you can train your ear to do that. Okay, they're called minimal pairs. I have many minimal pair lessons on this channel. So number one, you have to understand knowledge is not skill. Okay, knowledge is fine, but it's not skill. So don't think memorizing a bunch of things is going to translate into your ability to understand or use the language, because it's not. Okay, that's the big problem with schools. Then you have to understand that there's input output, which are two different skills, and that English has, or languages have, two input output pairs. When we're talking about improving your listening, you want to focus on your ears, not on your eyes. Okay, it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. Outside of perhaps as a supplement, it's nonsense to focus on your eyes when you're trying to improve your listening. This is also why if you watch a lot of subtitled things, maybe, oh yeah, I'm watching the show in English, it's great. I've watched, hours and hours and hours of English content, all while reading subtitles the entire time. It might even be English subtitles. That's fine. But when you're reading subtitles, your brain is taking a lot of resources, putting it towards your eyes to interpret the language through that pathway. Some of it is reaching your ears, but you're going to end up spending an infinitely longer time improving your listening if you're reading subtitles. Okay. So at the end of the day, how do you improve your listening? Listen a lot. Don't read. Right now, you can read and listen if you want. That's fine. But I'm saying if you want to improve your listening specifically, go watch lots of TV shows. Find a good TV series, Friends, whatever. No subtitles. I guarantee your listening will improve. It will be uncomfortable at first. There's a lot that you won't understand at first. That's okay. Just follow along. Use the context. Use what you see happening. I guarantee you 100% by the time you reach the end of that series, you have to go through the whole series, especially if it's many seasons. That's even better. But by the time you reach the end of that series, your listening will have improved drastically. Okay, that's the single biggest listening hack exercise. But in addition to that, I do strongly recommend you to do ear training in minimal pairs, actually hear the difference between sounds that maybe you don't hear the difference between. Learning how to produce those sounds can also reinforce that pathway and help you hear them better. And then you'll be able to actually hear. So there you go. That's my answer. I know it's a lot. There's lots of pieces there, but at the end of the day, listen a lot and don't read. Okay. The chat took off while I was explaining that. See, it's so funny because I run out of things. I get to the end of the chat and I'm done explaining things and there's like nothing. There's crickets. And then I started explaining something and everybody's like, ooh, I'm going to type now because he's actually explaining something. And then he's going to be so far behind. And then I'm going to be like, oh, that sucks. Okay. I've been learning English since I was, did I skip anything? No, okay. I don't think so. Yeah, okay. I've been learning English since I was 9 years old and I'm still not able to speak properly. I apologize for your experience with the traditional approach. One of my long-term goals, I don't know if I'll ever reach this point, but one of my long-term goals, this is a very bold and kind of arrogant statement. I know how it sounds, and it's not exactly intended the way that I mean, or the way that I say it, but I want to fix the education system. But that aside, yeah, no, I've had a lot of students, a lot of students, because English is obviously English is important in the world. It's you know, for decades it's been taught in schools, but you guys are just taught in such a horrible way. And the worst part about that is you guys are usually taught from a young age. Like all you really have to do, if you want your kid, like let's say you have a 3, 4, 5-year-old, or even if they're younger than that, but let's say you have a 3, 4, 5-year-old. You're like, I want this person to be a fluent speaker of French or English or Mandarin or whatever. The single best thing you can do, which seems very counterintuitive, you want to put them in front of the TV for as much as possible, just watching content, because they will absorb it, right? You can take advantage of that age and just pour the content into them. Native sources. Don't give them classes. Don't send them to school. Don't like, I don't know what schools are thinking around the world when they try to, like, there's no point in trying to teach a young child a language. Just give them the language and they will learn it. It doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, that's not the point. But it really sucks for you guys. Like 9 is kind of getting a little old in terms of what we're talking about here, but there's literally millions, probably billions of people, if we include the Chinese and India, billions of people who are not at the level of English they want to be because they were taught the language instead of being exposed to the language from an early age. Languages aren't taught. You can't teach a language. Okay. In fact, you can't teach any skill. The best that a teacher can do, and we use the word teach, obviously. Yeah. Okay, fine. But the best that a teacher in reality can do is guide. Because when we're talking about a skill, again, there's the input, there's the output. You have to be able to perceive the particular thing. In the case of language, there's a particular sound or a particular symbol if it's the written language. You have to be able to perceive that. Your brain has to understand it. And then when we're talking about the production, you have to be able to have whatever you're thinking come out effortlessly the proper way, whether that's grammatically, pronunciation, whatever. I lost my thought. That's always fun. Oh, yeah. So you have to do that as an individual living organism. I cannot give you the ability to hear the difference between E and I. I cannot give you the ability to effortlessly string your words together in a grammatically correct way. You have to do that. A teacher is completely powerless, because I could teach you all day long until I'm blue in the face. If you don't apply it, right? Now, of course, there's things that I can do. I can give you resources. I can guide you. I can do this and that. I can, point you in the right direction. But at the end of the day, you have to do it. Skills cannot be taught, period. Okay? They can only be acquired by the individuals who want to acquire them. Moving on. Wow, thank you for the detailed answer. I barely hear any D in didn't know. It sounds like I didn't know. The first D sound came between two vowels, and the D in I don't know is flap, I think. It can be, yes, potentially. Aren't the D's in don't and didn't the same? The first D at the start of don't and didn't is the same, yes. Again, we're talking about possibilities. It's supposed to be a regular D in both cases, but the possibility to flap does exist. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't know. I didn't know. You can flap them as possible. But there's supposed to be I don't know. I didn't know. I don't know. I didn't know. And if you're enunciating more, we will do that. But remember, there's not one answer. There's not one answer. Thank you so much. Forget John. Thank you. Awesome. Good. It was an awful joke. I'm talking about the retraction message. I have no idea what was retracted. I started at 12, and I would say I have a level of an average American speaker. It's got to have something to do with the critical period hypothesis. Maybe. Could just be that the path that you followed was more effective. My level now is better than many teachers who taught English. Well, that's good. Back then. Level now. Oh, okay. That's really good. Still good, yeah. Yeah, that's the other problem with, non-native teachers are fine. Like a non-native teacher can teach you a lot. But if they're teaching pronunciation and they have an accent, no good. No good. Especially if they're using the IPA, no good. If they're teaching you how to speak using outdated grammar rules, like never put a preposition at the end. I can't tell you how many students I've had that they're always shocked when I say, yeah, ignore that rule. And they're just like, but that's what we were taught. And it's like, yeah, you were taught wrong. That's not how the language works. It's an old rule that people don't follow anymore. So like even like you guys are taught some things that are just wrong. You guys are taught things that are outdated because that's how they were taught, right? And then that's how they were taught. And it's just this vicious cycle. It's just like, it's horrible. But then I started speaking every day at 12, not learning it formally. That's it, Finn. That's probably why. That's a very big impact. I've been learning English seriously for 3 years only. So yeah, okay, that's also another impact. Yeah, you got to actually put the effort into it. So you've been exposed to it in some way since you were 9, but you've only been seriously trying to improve it for 3 years. So, okay. Unless you're currently 12, in which case that is the entire 3 years. I don't think you're 12. Maybe you said, I don't remember. Okay. Really run out of time here. Good thing I'm catching up. I know what Josh thinks about the critical period hypothesis. Yes, I know what the critical period hypothesis is. Kind of a mouthful. Critical period hypothesis. It says you can effortlessly not have an accent in a second language if you have it. Yeah, there's also, it applies to other things too. I was just watching a video the other day about perfect pitch. There's a reason for that. It seems irrelevant, but it's not. And there's some people say that you can train yourself for perfect pitch. There's other people say that you have to be exposed to it, exposed to like variety, complex music at a young age in order to develop it during the critical period, blah, blah, blah. So it's not just language, but I could be wrong. I do think that the critical period hypothesis, and let me put it this way, I think that there is a critical period. But this gets nuanced. I think for the average person, okay, if because we all have strengths and weaknesses, right? It's possible that you actually, right, if you're average, you're average. So most people aren't particularly weak in a given skill or particularly strong in a given skill. They would probably be average. That's what average means. That being the case, if you are legitimately weak in language, like languages is something that's very difficult. Not like, oh, I tried to learn a language and it didn't work out. It was very hard. That's probably just the way that you were taught or that you tried to learn. I mean, it's not easy to learn a language, but the way that it's taught makes it almost impossible. I'm talking about like legitimately, like me having trouble like learning how to tie my shoes. That's a legitimate weakness in like mechanical understanding. My brain just doesn't work very well that way. So if you are legitimately weak in language, the critical period hypothesis is probably the thing that will allow you to sound native, and it will probably be impossible or take much, much, much longer for you to speak a language without an accent. I always hesitate from saying impossible, but if you are legitimately weak in language and you want to learn a new language and sound like a native, the critical theory or the critical period has already been passed, and it may be impossible. Now, that doesn't apply to the average person. Okay, I do think very strongly that for the average person, given the right techniques, given the right consistent effort, the average person can develop a native or near native accent in any language that they choose, regardless of their age. Now, if you're exposed, like say you're bilingual, English, Spanish, and they're both your native language, you went through the critical period for both of them, obviously, like that helped, right? The critical period will help. But I don't think it's like a death sentence. Like, oh, I wasn't exposed when I was 6 months old, and so it's impossible for me to do. I don't believe that. And that's also why I like to qualify native or near native. Like, I still think that you can probably fool a native if you're near native, if they're not specifically really trying to listen closely to you. Like Luca Lampariello, if there's a couple words that he just kind of says a little bit weird here and there on occasion, but if I'm not specifically trying to listen to his pronunciation, if I didn't know he was Italian, I would assume he was American, like just automatically. But even in his case, he is very good because even when I do specifically really, really, really closely listen to him, there's not much that I pick up. So even in that aspect, he's still good. He would probably be like 99.9% maybe. And that's definitely more than enough to fool most natives. So that's fine. But that's in terms of like pronunciation. The critical period, I don't think applies at all to like grammar and stuff like that. Like being able to like learn a new language or like learn to speak it in like the most natural, effortless way. There might be some sort of upper limit to it. Like if we're just talking about like general expression, I don't mean basic simple expression, but just like general expression. Like I don't think you need to go through the critical period to gain that level, right? Where you would still sound very natural, blah, blah, blah. But there might be some higher levels of expression, some more complicated nuances and feelings in the subconscious mind of a speaker of that language that, at least if not directly hacked into, like with the logic of prepositions, that you might be barred from that, but that's like the icing on the cake. the critical period might bar you from the icing, but not from the cake. So it exists. I definitely acknowledge that it exists. I do acknowledge that it's very powerful. It's very useful. If you're lucky, if you went through a critical period for whatever language, or if it's music, whatever it is. But I don't think it's as much of a like, oh, that's it, like you're done. I don't think it's as much of a cutoff as a lot of people like to think. It's in that because if there's one thing about humans, we love to give excuses. We love, because it's part of our story, right? We're all the best storytellers in the world. Even if you couldn't write a story to save your life, you're telling yourself a story every day with the thoughts that you have and the beliefs that you reinforce about how the world works and this and that, whatever. The world is how it is, but we color it with our thoughts. We color it with our experiences. We tell ourselves a story. I'm good at this. I'm bad at that. I'm blah, 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 blah. Some of it is objectively accurate. Some of it is not. And especially when we start wrapping our identity in our ability to do or not do something, or particularly not do something, like, oh yeah, I tried learning a language. I took 4 years in school and I tried this and I tried this and I tried everything and I'm just not good at languages. That might be the case. Or it could just be that you still haven't used the right techniques, because most people don't talk about those techniques. It can be kind of hard to find them. Not that it's like some secret special knowledge or anything, but anyway, point is that we love to give excuses. Age is a common excuse. I'm too old to learn a language. I'm too old to learn how to program. I'm too old to learn a musical instrument. Garbage, nonsense. I don't care if you're 80 years old. Garbage. I'm not talented. Okay, talent exists. That has nothing to do with you. Has no impact on your ability to learn that skill. May have an impact on how fast you learn, may have an impact on the relative ease of learning, may have an impact on potentially the highest upper reaches that you can reach. But icing. It's all icing. It's not the cake. We love to give ourselves excuses for why we can't do stuff. And the critical period, I think, whether from an average layperson or even from many scientists, the critical period seems to be yet another excuse. And or in the case of many scientists who think like it's this big iron curtain that like once you pass it, you're done. It's sort of become wrapped up in their own belief system and their own identity to some extent, in some way, because the human psyche likes to do that. It's just an excuse, mostly. That's my thought. I don't believe age is a very major factor in English learning as a second language. It's definitely not. Absolutely not. Using subtitles was one of my awful mistakes. Well, I mean, we all learn. Like, I would probably be able to understand everything in Japanese at this point if I would have watched every episode of anime with no subtitles. But yeah, I'm always reading subtitles. Because I'm there to watch the anime. Like, it would be nice. Like, I do want to improve my Japanese and this and that, or whatever. I pick out some words and I can understand, not a lot, but I can understand some things. But without the subtitles, I would be completely lost. And when I watch anime, usually my priority isn't to learn Japanese. It's to enjoy the anime and the story. And so that's okay. That's fine. That's my goal. So I end up reading, and right, my goal isn't to improve my Japanese listening. Nothing wrong with it if that's your goal. If your goal is to improve listening, then subtitles are like the single worst thing that you can do. So it's also context dependent. It depends on what your goals are. Right? I can relate everything you're saying regarding knowledge is not skill. It's brilliant. Yeah, exactly. And see, that's the other thing. That's why I say like skills can't be taught, because like, and I've learned that so much with the mouth posture course. Like, you reach a certain point in the mouth posture course where everything just kind of clicks and it all starts to make sense. And you're like, oh, that's why we did all that stupid work in phase 0. But people don't get it until they experience it. And it's one of the biggest problems I have with teaching people this mouth posture approach is they have to get through phase 0 and they can't understand why. Like conceptually, logically, they're like, okay, I see how this could have a connection, but they don't have the experience of why it's useful. And then when they get up into phase 2 and they start making some sounds and start doing some transitions, then it clicks and they're like, I now, through my own experience, understand why we did that, and I'm glad we did. And that's true across many skills. Most people don't see why this stupid little basic level that doesn't seem directly connected to the skill I want to develop. They don't see why it's useful. They don't see why they should spend their time on it. Blah, 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 blah. But that's the key. Like, it makes your life a lot easier if you go up front, do the heavy lifting up front by getting some basic ability before you actually try to put that into the skill itself. I don't want to be lost. Yeah, using subtitles is easier. That is true. That is very, very true. But if your goal is to improve, if you're watching something just because you want to watch it, and of course it's easy to tell yourself like, well, this is really interesting, I want to watch it, I don't want to be bothered by, having to learn English, not understanding, I just want to watch it. And so you tell yourself, well, I'm just going to use the subtitles. Okay, fine, whatever. This is an excuse. If you legitimately just want to watch something because of the story and you don't really care if it improves your English or not, use subtitles. I don't care. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you're watching something and you also want to improve your English, it sucks at first. It absolutely sucks at first. The only reason why I did it was because I did it on accident. The first time. The second time was on purpose. But I discovered it, and then I later heard some polyglots talking about it a few years after that. But when I was teaching myself Spanish, I had no idea what I was doing, remember. I found a technique that was very, very intensive where like you look up everything, like you're using subtitles in like English and Spanish. You have like two versions of like two tabs with the same exact episode playing, and you're like analyzing everything, and that can work. But it was not for me. It was too much intensive. It was too intensive. It was too stressful. It was just like I couldn't even get through like the first 10 minutes of the first episode. But I liked the topic. It was a historical drama. It was great. Okay, cool. I love historical dramas. Set in Spain in like the early 1900s. And I got enough into the show that I was like, you know what, screw this method. Like, this show seems really, really interesting. I just want to watch the show. And so that's what I did. There were subtitles. And I watched the whole first season with subtitles because I didn't care at that point. Like at that point, it's just like, okay, yeah, it's Spanish, but I'm basically wasting my time just following the story. I'm not actually learning much Spanish. But that was okay because I just wanted to watch the story. Then there were 2 more seasons, but I could not find either season with subtitles. I could only find the raw original content. So I had to make a choice. Do I abandon the story? Because at the time, with subtitles, I probably only understood like 60% or 70% of like the words and the grammar and stuff. Without subtitles, I probably understood closer to like 30 or 40%. Maybe even less than that. So I had a choice. Do I abandon it and just say, well, I can't understand it and I'm not going to enjoy it, so I guess I only got to watch the first season? Or do I just watch it anyway and just try to understand what I can understand? And because I was so involved in the story, I liked the character so much, I had to see what happened. Even if I couldn't understand everything that was happening, I had to see what was happening. That's the power of a good story. And that's why when I recommend this technique, I say if you want to watch the first season with subtitles so you can get attached to the characters, that's fine. You can do that. You don't have to, but you can do that. That's acceptable. But after the first season, no subtitles. Don't even think about putting subtitles on. Maybe if you want to go back and check something after you've watched the whole episode, because easy of a trap to keep doing that, then you can do that as a supplementary tool, but no subtitles. So I watched the remaining two subtitles, saying that too much. I watched the remaining 2 seasons with no subtitles. And literally, it was like 2 or 3 days after that, I woke up one morning because my routine at the time, because that was during the time that I used to smoke. I would wake up, I would go outside to smoke, and while I'm smoking, I would listen to Spanish music, just kind of like to get my brain going, and whatever. And there are songs that I had listened to hundreds of times, right? I hadn't studied the lyrics or anything because I hadn't thought about that at that point. I was just trying to like listen to Spanish music. I liked how it sounded. I was getting exposure or whatever. But there were songs that I had heard hundreds of times, and I could pick out a word here, I could pick out a sentence there, whatever. But I definitely didn't understand, the entirety of any song at that point. I woke up, went outside, turned on the Spanish music, and like magic, I could understand 70 to 80% of what I was listening to. In songs that I had previously, just the previous day, I could only maybe understand 20 or 30%, maybe 40. It's like magic. It's like magic. You give your brain the right food, it'll process it in the background. And eventually you reach a certain tipping point, usually, where something clicks and it works. It makes sense. The brain is weird like that. So it's uncomfortable at first, but it is literally, aside from training your ears for like sounds and stuff, this one activity is literally the single biggest, most powerful listening exercise. I would even say listening hack, and you have to call it a hack if you don't want to. It is the single most powerful thing that you can do for your listening, even if you don't study pronunciation. But yeah. Number one is ear training at the fundamental sound level, and also deals with like linking and some other stuff, but basically sounds, maybe with some of the rhythm and stress. And then past that, it's this exercise. Just watch series after series after series with no subtitles, and your listening will just improve. I replicated that with another series, Isabel, which was a historical drama about Queen Isabel. And even there, some of the grammar was a little old-timey. They were trying to make it historically accurate but still understandable for a modern Spanish speaking audience. So they were using, they were using bos a lot, which now only Argentina uses, but they were using bos and things like that. And so there was even some grammar that I was being exposed to that I wouldn't have to worry about normally. But that aside, I noticed once I reached the end of that series, I had another bump in my listening abilities. So yeah, can't recommend it enough. I've been asking people, or I've been asked by a lot of people why I sound the way I do, and I just can't answer here. I basically double check everything I already do naturally. I just say that I happened to learn it when I was young, just so I don't say something like, I'm just cool like that. I would say that. I'm just cool like that. I'm not sure what you mean. I double check everything I already do naturally. So like there's things that you do naturally, and then you ask about them, like you ask me certain questions about this or that or whatever, just like make 100% sure consciously that like, okay, I'm doing the right thing. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Anyway, we are way over time. I need to learn how to speak on a point instead of like speak to the point instead of rambling so much. Just to be 100% sure I'm not doing some crazy thing. Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like you have the ability. I've never actually heard you speak, but based on what you've told me, some of the questions that even things that you've noticed, right, that I wasn't consciously aware of, like the whole vowel plus NT thing, sounds like you're on the right track. What's with my typos today as you forget to put an apostrophe between the T and the S and what's? More of a minor typo. I mean, all the pieces are there. We just technically are supposed to put an apostrophe. You're drunk, go home. Anyway. All right. Yeah, so I should definitely go. Thank you guys. Moving into the future, I mean, this format is easy for me. I'm probably not going to do any live streams where there's like this big complicated lesson plan or anything like that. But in order to make it maybe more interesting for people, bring in like more people to the live stream, just to make it more worthwhile. Because like there's like so few people here. It's like I don't mind doing it, but at the same time, it's like there's almost nobody here. So if you think of any ways that the live stream could be more interesting or useful or whatever, aside from just answering questions, feel free to let me know. You can leave a comment on a video or whatever, or on this video after the live is over, whatever you want. Can't think of anything or you don't care, then that's fine. But I don't know. Just feels like I do more than ramble on about my answers. So anyway, thank you guys very much. I will see you next week, and have a good week.